Good evening, Wakefield, and welcome to the school committee meeting on this Wednesday, August 12th, 2020. I'd like to call this meeting to order and note that a small group of us are in studio, social distancing, but this is a virtual meeting via Zoom and broadcast on WCAT's Live Facebook page. I'd like to start the meeting off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next is a reading of our mission statement. The vision of the Wakefield Public Schools is to graduate students who are confident lifelong learners, who are respectful and caring members of their community. Our mission is to prepare students for college, career, and community by providing rich and challenging curriculum, high-quality instruction, and educational experiences that meet their individual needs and interests. Next on the agenda is the public comment section, and keeping aligned with the remote participation guidelines, we encourage anyone from the public who wishes to participate in public comment to send via email to either myself or Superintendent Lyons. And tonight we have received several letters that I will read to you. And also it does appear that we have a pretty large group watching our meeting. So I would just ask that everyone in the public make sure that all their devices have been muted. Thank you. The first letter is from Katie Frazier of 3 Mashie Way, North Reading. Dear School Committee and Wakefield community, I write to you today to share with you my story as an educator of Wakefield, but also as a parent in the face of the decision regarding the reopening of schools. A little over 2 years ago, in early March, my life had changed. It was the first of 5 week-long visits that year where my 2-year-old son would spend in the hospital. It was the moment I learned about his invisible enemy, an enemy that comes without warning, that infiltrates your life without remorse. An enemy that robs you of the freedom to dream, to choose, to plan, and to live freely without fear of what may happen at any moment, at any time. You see, my son was diagnosed back then with a seizure disorder, one that I would soon learn would be resistant to any medication, one that wouldn't respond to treatment. And I grieved. I felt waves of anger and sadness, and I tried to hold on to any resemblance of control that I could keep him safe and give him his brightest days in the face of his darkest enemy. And then I met COVID, and I found myself comparing these two enemies, just like my son's intractable epilepsy. COVID had come without warning. It had infiltrated our lives and wreaked havoc on our norms. It created anger and fear. Both of them are not medically understood. There is no cure or vaccine. They are each their own, but one and the same, an invisible enemy. And as the school year approaches, I have been mentally training myself to think, yes, we will all adapt, just like I have for my son. We will learn how to engage our students from a 6-foot distance. We will adjust our curriculum and pedagogies to meet the current social emotional needs for our upcoming class. And although we are afraid, we will stand tall and wear our masks and shields. We will smile through our eyes and give our students the best days that we can in the darkest of moments. And I think of all these things, and I want to believe them, but it just doesn't feel right. In a way, it feels as if I'm being called on in class without raising my hand, that a struggling reader asked to read a passage out loud without a chance to prepare first. I feel all the very things I have learned not to do as an effective teacher, and that feels wrong. It's as though I am being asked to do a job that hasn't granted me the time needed to do it well. Today I'm not awake at dawn with just the fear that my son will have a seizure in his sleep and need me to turn him on his side to breathe. Now I lay awake carrying the extra weight that 1 month I will be doing just that, but for all 23 kindergarten students. that I will need to protect them from the invisible enemy just as I protect my now 4-year-old son. And the questions that keep me from sleep that I am afraid to say out loud are screaming inside me. What if my students get sick, or my colleagues, my leaders, my parents, siblings, friends, and grandparents that make up their precious little lives, innocent lives? What if instead of smiling through our eyes, we find ourselves forcing back a flood of tears? Tears that represent a broken promise we made when we vowed to keep our students and families safe. So yes, the two are similar, but what is more critical is what makes them different. The difference is that COVID, we can control what we do and how we do it. We can use time to shelter our students from the lifelong plan of losing a loved one too soon. We can do our best to give them brighter days in the face of the darkest enemy. Today, we can decide to start remote and use time to weave all the parts of the hybrid plan together to get it ready for a safe reality. We can say today, here and now, that one student, one teacher, one staff, one life lost is one too many. So I am urging you to pick the choice that keeps us safe and to do it knowing the difference, that you have been given the right to choose. If I had a choice that let me shield my son from the wrath of his invisible enemy, I wouldn't give it another thought. I owe my students, whom I care for deeply, their families, my colleagues, and my 4-year-old son, the decency to practice what I preach every day in my kindergarten classroom, to use my words to live my life with my heart wide open, and to make smart, thoughtful choices for the greater community. So in closing, I ask that you make a choice that we will all live to see the outcome of. Sincerely, Katie Frazier, kindergarten teacher, Wakefield Public Schools.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, you can read this one.
I was going to say, do you want, I can read
Oh,
Heidi's.
yeah, sure. Yep. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Doug Lyons. I'm the superintendent of schools. I received an email earlier, and I'm going to summarize the email with the permission of the parent that shared it. It was sent by Heidi Rossicone. So Mrs. Rossicone, I have known and have kind of come to know that she is a fierce advocate for what she believes in, a fierce advocate for her children, and a staunch supporter of the Wakefield Public Schools. She wrote this evening, or late this afternoon, to let us know that she is in support of a hybrid model. She has shared that she has participated in all of the Zoom calls and updates that have taken place, and has also kind of debriefed with parents around scheduling concerns. They've talked about surveys, and has been involved in what she describes as everything that we have communicated to the community. She also shared that her experience with just remote instruction last spring, it did not go well. And so she is writing tonight to really advocate that students have to be back in school for their own well-being and for the well-being of their development. She's very clear about the toll that remote learning or remote only has taken on families, the costs and additional costs that families have incurred to pay for tutoring for their children. And she wants us to know very clearly that she is fully on board and in favor of a hybrid and in any way to get students back to in-person teaching as soon as we can possibly do that safely. So I want to say thank you to Mrs. Rossicone, and we appreciate that. I also want to add, similar to what Amy started with, in regard to the public comment piece. So you'll notice tonight that we are in a hybrid school committee meeting. Some people are in district and the rest of the people are participating via Zoom. Normally, if we were in studio, we would have people step to the mic, say their name, their address, and then they would make their own public statement. One of the things that I think we're discussing, and we'll discuss after this meeting, is really the best way to promote public participation and to allow individuals to come and speak for themselves and not have, not rely on us to kind of convey their very important words. We, of course, don't want to miss anything, and we want to do every word justice. So So please keep that in mind. So if we miss anything this evening, you can have a conversation with any of us, but I would suggest that you reach out to Amy or to me directly. And if we miss anything, we will certainly bring it up in our next school committee meeting. So thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Doug. I have another letter that I'd like to read from Florence Martin, 58 Lynn Street, Melrose. Good evening. I would like to thank those who are physically present tonight, realizing that the reason some are not is not because they were not willing to, but because they were space issues in this world of social distancing. I would also like to thank every member of our administrative team under the leadership of Doug Lyons and Kara Morrow, who handled the closure with amazing guidance. They provided the best scenario possible under the circumstances, doing so with the best interest of students always on the forefront of their decisions. During this difficult time, they treated us with the utmost respect and understanding. Having been an educator in Wakefield for over 40 years as a primary teacher and also an active WEA member, I feel I have the wisdom to make this statement, which might cause trouble. I hope you consider this necessary trouble, a statement made famous by the late great Congressman John Lewis. There is no need to express feelings of primary teachers. I could not be half as eloquent as my amazing colleague Katie Frazier. As you know, there has been much controversy and division 2 years over the hybrid models at the elementary level from both staff and parents. I would like to state two things that I am 100% sure. One is that despite what some members of this community think, we do want to go back to our jobs. Two is that we want to do it safely for all, and when unable to do so, to have an outstanding virtual program for our students, which as of now, we are not sure what that looks like. I believe that a quote from Scripture, "A house divided cannot stand," and unfortunately, that is where we have landed with this model. At this point, I honestly do not know what model is being presented tonight. I would like to commend all of the re-entry committees for their hard work and altruistic intentions, one of which I was a member, but I believe we need to go back to the table and find an option that we can all move forward with enthusiastically. In union leadership training and my administration degree, back united and knowing we have vetted all of the best possible options. I realize the clock is ticking and parents need and want to know, but feel process could be fast-tracked, and I believe well worth the wait. Thank you for listening to my concerns. Florence Martin. Okay, the next public comment I have is from Lisa Koplik of 5 Archstone Circle in Reading, Mass. My name is Lisa Koplik, and I am a 4th grade teacher at Greenwood Elementary School. Please contact me if you would like the full version of this comment. After reviewing the town, state, and country data, the recommendations from health experts, and considering the realities of teaching, I come to the conclusion that it is not safe to open schools in person at all, even in a hybrid model. I believe that the safest and most reasonable course of action would be to open remotely, to use public health guidance from the state and country to determine if or when it is safe to open. I also believe that waiting for a vaccine may be the safest course of action, provided that a vaccine is safe, effective, and studied on all groups of people who would receive it. I see articles daily discussing the almost 100,000 children across the U.S. diagnosed with coronavirus in the last 2 weeks of July. Articles talking about how the viral load of infection in younger children may be twice that of adults. Articles about how older elementary-age children may pass along the virus just as easily as adults do. I've seen that school districts in Georgia and Indiana have quarantined hundreds of their students and teachers. How can we not learn from these examples? How many people have to get sick and die before we do something to ensure absolute safety for our community? COVID-19 is a novel virus, meaning it is completely brand new and has only been studied as long as it has existed, or about 6 months. With only 6 months of information, we have no true longitudinal data of what happens to the body after it contracts coronavirus. Will there be adverse effects later into the future? Will there be more information on what happens to young children? We don't know. Children in the U.S. have not been at school since early March, so we cannot know. If we were able to decide upon a hybrid model, what does this actually look like in the classroom? In elementary school, around 60 to 80% of the day is small groups and conferences. How can we hold these small groups and conferences with children we cannot approach them? Also, how can we maintain distance and safely when the kids are eating or drinking without masks? When kids travel from the second floor to the basement to go to the bathrooms at Greenwood, where toilets with no lids aerosolize fecal matter that may contain the virus? What if a child is sobbing and we need to comfort them? What if a child needs help entering the school building because they are so anxious they refuse to leave their parent? If a child bolts from the classroom and runs towards the street, what if a young kid needs their shoe tied? What if someone needs to be restrained? Some of these pieces are events I see almost daily, especially at the younger grades. Then, when we consider DESE's recommendation that 3 feet is fine for social distancing within schools, why did they decide this amount of space was acceptable? Where did they receive information that this is safe? Nowhere else in the entire country has anyone said that 3 feet is acceptable. Finally, school is not a Band-Aid for child abuse, poverty, hunger, and homelessness. The government has used schools to provide services to help children, and it is disgraceful that these unbelievably massive faucets of society are placed with chronically underfunded public schools. I know that remote learning may not be ideal, especially for our most vulnerable population of children. It wasn't ideal for me either. Still, I would rather teach remotely than end up grieving the loss of a dead child, a dead parent, or a dead educator. I truly believe that this is our greatest duty right now, to provide a safe space for all, and that space exists only online. Sincerely, Lisa Koplik. Thank you. 2 more, thank you. The next is from Amy Lehman of 10 Fox Road. Hello, my name is Amy Lehman. I am a Wakefield parent with a fifth and third grader this fall. I am sharing a glimpse of hope that in-person teaching can work in our current situation. My 8-year-old is attending the extended school year at the Woodville School, and it's going really well. Similar to the proposed reopening hybrid plans, the class size is small and the school day is short. My student wears a mask for 3 hours with no resistance, no complaints. They do allow for a mask break, and she hasn't been this energized about learning since Thursday, March 12th, the last day Wakefield schools were open. As administration and staff continue to plan the reopening of our schools, it's important to shift our focus to the safe, successful, in-person, extended school year reality that Wakefield and other Massachusetts districts are experiencing, and not the worst-case scenario assumptions. The reality is 8-year-olds can and will wear masks. In closing, my family has confidence that face masks and social distancing work at preventing the spread of germs, and therefore fully support the hybrid model. We respectfully ask that the school committee vote in favor of the hybrid plan. Thank you, Amy Lehman. Sorry, 2 more now. The next is from Erica Farrell of 19 Evangelista Way. Dear Mr. Lyons and School Committee, I am writing in full support of the hybrid plans that have been submitted from our administrators. I have 3 children, a daughter entering 5th grade at Gavin Middle School, a son entering 2nd grade at the Doll Bear, and a 2.5-year-old son at home. After reviewing the presentations from both the Gavin Middle School and the Doll Bear, I feel confident that our children will be educated well and, most importantly, safely, given the demands of what we faced during the COVID pandemic. Adam Colantoni and his team shared with us the pictures of each classroom seat spacing, along with the plans to keep our children safe and healthy. This allows for a proper quality education with in-person teaching at the school and opportunities for middle schoolers to socialize safely, a very important part of learning and growing, especially at the middle school level. Additionally, the plan for remote learning, both synchronous and asynchronous, will keep our children engaged with their teachers and continue the learning process. My daughter even commented she likes the schedule. At the elementary level, the option that was presented with half-day plans has my full support. While the half-days are indeed short, creating consistency in the elementary child's routine each week and having as much in-person interaction with the teacher remains my top priority for effective learning. I, as well as you, witnessed firsthand just how difficult learning remote for younger children is, and all the many challenges they face. While the second option that is presented allows for more time each day, it is still a shortened day and leaves our children with less routine and opportunities to be in front of their teacher on a regular basis. Ultimately, no plan is perfect, and as committed by administration, these plans are fluid and will change as needed. And while we cannot please everyone, and these plans for my family will be tough to manage, I am willing to make them work for our family of 5. Thank you, Erica Farrell. And the last one is from Elizabeth Donahue of 14 Elm Street. Hello, my name is Elizabeth Donahue. I am a Wakefield parent of an 8-year-old who will be in 3rd grade this fall. I am writing to extend my support of the proposed hybrid model for this upcoming school year. My son has been attending in person the extended school year program at the Woodville for the past 3 weeks, and I wanted to highlight how impressed I am and how well this program has been run by the staff. The protocols in place to keep my child and others safe are so well executed that I am confident we can safely transition this hybrid model to the fall. Classes are small, children attend 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, with masks, snack break in between. My son has had no issues wearing masks and has accepted this new routine as his new norm for school. This has been a great preview and practice for my son, who is autistic. He was able to transition into this new routine after day 1. I have not seen him this happy and engaged since he was in school in March. I know that safety is of the utmost importance, but the mental health of our children also needs to be considered in this decision. I urge you to please vote for the hybrid model for the Wakefield Public Schools. Thank you, Elizabeth Donahue. So thank you all for participating in our public comment. Next, I would just like to take a moment to introduce a few members of our Youth Action Council. I believe tonight we have Lauren, Jenna, and Alex. If you guys are with us, you can just, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and maybe introduce yourself and share a little details about what the Youth Council is all about.
Hi, I'm Jenna Carver. I'm going to 7th grade next year, and I'm the representative of the 7th grade for the Youth Council. And basically what the Youth Council does is it provides a voice for the youth in Wakefield, and it teaches you how the government and other important committees are run.
Well, thank you so much. Welcome to our meeting, Jenna.
Hi.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi. My name's Lauren Boyce. I'm a rising junior at the high school. So Jenna and I and Alex, he couldn't make it tonight, we're the liaisons from the Youth Council to the school committee. So our main goal is really to build a line of communication between the students and the committee, and then our hope is that with this relationship, it can provide opportunities to advocate for needs, express concerns, and share ideas. So with that said, we're really excited to work with all of you, and thank you for having us tonight.
Well, thank you so much. We're also excited to have you all be working along with us. Does anyone from the school committee have any questions? No? Okay, well, thank you again for joining, and this could be a long one, so if you want to exit, you can do so, but we do look forward to sharing some time with you this school year, and look forward to hearing your perspectives in regards to the student body in Wakefield. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good night. Do we have a consent?
We do. Move that the school committee approve the amended minutes of the June 24th, 2020 school committee meeting and the minutes of the July 14th, 2020 school committee meeting, and accept the minutes of the July 23rd, 2020 and the July 30th, 2020 school committee finance and facilities subcommittee meetings, and the minutes of the July 28th, 2020 school committee policy and communications subcommittee meeting as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Judy?
Ms. Purcell,
Yes.
Ms. Baer,
Yes.
Mr. Markham,
Yes.
Mr. Callahan,
Yes.
Ms. Guida,
Yes.
and Mr. Boudreau.
Yes.
Thank you. Voted unanimously. Moving on with the agenda items are the business reports, and I will pass it off to Christine.
Good evening, everyone. So tonight you have the July financial report, which is the first month of fiscal year '21. The first page is the local budget. You can see there's payrolls for July, encumbrances for non-salary accounts. We're anticipating encumbering for salaries probably sometime in September, when we have fully all the staff back. The next page is by school, by location. And then we go into our grants and revolving accounts. The grants are what's budgeted. This is the amounts that we've submitted our applications to the state. We probably won't know about our Title I and Title IIA and the SPED grants probably until October. But we know about the ESSER grant, the COVID relief grant, and we were notified about our METCO grant. So that's sort of where we're at for grants. And the last page is the revolving accounts. Not a lot of activity at this point. You can see the balance were carried forward from last year. So we're in good shape financially, and we'll move on until August next month.
I would just like to remind any members of the community, if you're joining our meeting, if you could please mute your devices, that would be great. Thank you so much.
So is there any questions on the financial reports?
I don't think so.
Is there anything, Christine, is there anything unexpected in there at this
No.
point? It's
No.
too early, right?
Too early.
Okay, that's what I assumed. Okay, thank you.
So we have a couple of motions.
Payroll warrants?
So payrolls for July, you can see the only staff are the year-round staff in July, so they're much smaller than our normal 10-month staff.
So, move to that the school committee approve payroll warrants number 2 and number 4 as presented.
Second.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Ms. Purcell,
Yes.
Ms. Baer,
Yes.
Mr. Markham,
Yes.
Mr. Callahan,
Yes.
Ms. Guida,
Yes.
Mr. Boudreau.
Yes.
Thank you. Next is, do we have gifts?
No gifts.
No gifts. Okay. Thank you, Christine. Next on the agenda are chair comments and action items. And I actually don't have anything that I need to relay to the public tonight, so I will hand it off to Superintendent Lyons.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank the faculty and staff for joining the call. It's nice. I can see a lot of familiar faces. I see Mr. Drinkwater. Looks like you're in witness protection there in your dimly lit little square. But it's good to see everybody. We really appreciate you being here and being part of this. And so the presentation that you're going to see tonight is going to be jointly presented between a group of administrators. But it represents the work of many, many more. Kara and I were talking earlier, and I think she said that, we have over 80 people working on reopening teams at every level. And even though you're going to hear from just a core group of administrators, this wouldn't be possible, and we wouldn't be able to present this information without their hard work. So we want to thank them for that. In regard to our presentation tonight, I'll be presenting along with Kara Morrow, the assistant superintendent. We have our high school principal joining us. We have our middle school principal, Adam Colantoni, joining us. And representing the elementary level, we have Matt Carter and Tiffany Back. And so thank you very much for being with us. And so I'll jump right into this. So I believe you all can see these slides at home, and if I'm looking to the left, it's just projected on a screen to our left. And so, this is critically important, and I shared this in our last presentation as well, because I feel like we can't say this enough, right? Is just setting this context that we're still in a state of emergency, the pandemic still exists, we still need to be vigilant around taking safety precautions to keep ourselves and others safe, right? And as we kind of prepare to return to school, this is a starting point for all of us, and all of the planning that we've done, and the administrators address this with their reopening teams, and any changes that we've made in these plans that you'll see tonight is also with the lens, a starting point of safety, right? So again, in a qualifying statement under factors to consider, we all know, including teachers, administrators, all of our personnel on reopening teams, that there's no substitute.
No, Daddy, seriously, come on, we'll see what happens tomorrow. They're gonna, like, 12 years.
And so there's no substitute for in-person teaching and learning. Our goal continues to be to make relationships with our students and families and to provide high quality instruction, right? We've trying to approach this with a high degree of kind of output in regard to we want to do everything we can, right, to support teaching and learning, whatever plan we are offering, right? So teachers are teachers. And I think Adam Colantoni said this, it doesn't matter in the mindset that we have, it doesn't matter whether we're in a remote plan, a hybrid plan, or an in-person plan, right? Teachers teach and they meet the needs of kids, and they do that remarkably well, and we will continue to do that as we work to reopen schools. So the next kind of part of this, and something that we try to think about often, is equity, right? We know and we have learned with our closure in the spring that started on the evening of March 12th forward, we missed 61 days of school. We know that in regard to equity, some students and families need to have their children in school. They need to be in school. And I think in one of the letters that was read this evening, our schools provide so much to our community beyond teaching and learning. We have cafeteria staff coming in the summer, throughout the spring and into the summer, that are making lunches for students. It started off with just a few. At the height of our program, I want to say we're feeding over 80 families. Right? I don't think anyone would have ever thought that level of participation would have been warranted or needed for us to serve the community the way that we have, right? And you heard tonight in the comments from families who have participated in our summer services that we've been able to take safety precautions, create small groups, and bring students in small groups back safely, right? And these are populations of students that need to be in school to get their service, right? Not all students are able to learn remotely, and that's a reality. And we need to kind of be thoughtful of that as we're planning, in addition to considering safety and all of the other variables that we're looking at. So in regard to equity, just please consider that, right? The other thing that I'd love to bring up is this idea of relationships, right? When we're thinking about equity and thinking about outcomes for students, right? Those are all based on relationships. Relationships that teachers have and personnel have with children and with families, right? They're rooted in trust. And the successes that you heard about earlier this evening, I think really echo that. I just don't want those things to get lost. The objectives for this presentation is to share staff and parent feedback through our survey data. And in our week between meetings, we presented an initial plan on the 4th. In the week between meetings, We've met with hundreds of parents at every level. We met at elementary, middle school, and high school. And we have more meetings coming up this week, which I'll talk about at the end. The second objective is to share the improvements that we've made based on what we've learned in the past week. We also want to provide additional information regarding safety protocols and preparation, and would like to discuss next steps in regard to a recommendation from us. I'd like to turn it over to Kara Morrow to talk about the survey data.
Great. Thanks, Doug. So I could just go through this first slide. It breaks down the staff and the parent and family responses and how many people responded to the survey that Doug had mentioned that we sent out after we had proposed our initial recommendations on August 4th. And our point in issuing follow-up surveys was really to get a pulse on where people were in terms of their feelings around what was presented, to offer maybe additional suggestions for us to consider, and also extra other questions as well that we could potentially hit on. So just to give some, we feel like that this is a pretty good sampling of staff as well as parent and family. In terms of the staff, just to give some context, we surveyed all Unit A and Unit C members. So at Doyle, that's about 25 people. At the elementary, about 165, Galvin about 128, and the high school about 100. So within the surveys, each of the surveys was set up a little bit different depending on the information that we need, but a constant question that was asked in all of them for staff was, with this hybrid model, do you anticipate being able to return to your position? So we wanted to start the process of just getting a sense of our staff and their needs, and how we will support staff if we move forward with a hybrid, where we might be lacking staff. So we've just started that process, and we plan to follow up after this meeting with probably a more detailed breakdown to get more of a sense of things. But as you can see, of the respondents at Doyle, there was about 25% of the respondents, which breaks down to about 4 people. Elementary, we had about 13%, which was, in terms of numbers, about 16 people at the elementary who didn't anticipate they could return. Galvin, about 15%, which broke out to be like 10 people. And at the high school, we were looking at about 27%, which was broke down from respondents to be about 16 people.
You want to switch?
Sure, yeah. Yep. So then the other piece within the staff survey, we just wanted to give, again, more opportunity to share concerns, questions, things that people were thinking about in response to the proposal. So we tried to tease out some trends, and tonight we're hoping to focus the ways in which we refined each model around these concerns. I think, the safety piece, people feeling unsafe, people, wanting to make sure that we were following health and safety guidelines. There would be enough PPE. Lunch at the Galvin was a target area for refinements that Adam will talk about tonight. We heard about the split of cohorts at the Galvin too, which will be hit on tonight. We heard about the elementary schedule. We really put out an alternative, and we asked people to give us feedback on that. And also the need to be consistent in the full remote day at the elementary level between a Wednesday or a Friday. So we just teased out some of the commentary that we got from the staff survey. And we plan to hit on a lot of those trends in our breakdown at each level. On the parent side of things, we wanted to get a sense from our families around the hybrid models as well, in terms of their viewing of those models and how they will work for their families. And the way we broke them down was we asked, will this model will work well for my family? I could make this model work for my family. It doesn't work, or it can't work at all. And I think it's going to be really important for us to dig into this a little bit more to support our families, especially for the ones who felt like the model could not work for them at all. And we plan to do that as well. So at the Galvin, I'll just break it down by slide. You can see the Galvin has in the blue. We had 561 parents respond, and of that, 474 were favorable in terms of, and by favorable I mean they felt that the model could work well for their family or they could find a way to make it work. At the high school, we had 569 families respond, and of that, 484 felt they could the model would work well, or they could find a way to make the model work. Okay, so now the elementary, the model that we put forward at the August 4th meeting for the elementary level was the model that came out of our reopening meetings. It was based on feedback from teachers, from administrators, and all of us really thinking about what can we do to keep in mind the age and the developmental needs of the elementary student while also maintaining safety guidelines and not doubling our staff or increasing facility space. So after we presented, we did hear from parents and we heard from staff around mostly logistical pieces around how that would be a challenge for working families. We heard the safety questions that I had brought up earlier, and all of which we wanted to consider. So we did in the elementary staff survey come up with a potential hybrid B that is probably pretty closer to the middle and the high school schedule in terms of the concept of 2 days in person and 3 days remote. And so we thought, just to get a pulse of the community and the staff, that we would put that out and hear what we got for feedback on that. So of the elementary parent group, we had 883 parents respond, and it was pretty close in terms of preference. We had 602 parents prefer hybrid model A, which is what we originally presented, and 575 parents prefer hybrid model B. The staff one, if I can just go over to that, had a higher percentage on hybrid model B, but I think it should be noted it was about probably like a 10% difference, a matter of 10 opinions between Unit A and Unit C. And I'll preface this by saying, like, we didn't put this out necessarily for a vote, majority rules, let's look at the number and that's it, and we're moving on. This was a very well thought out proposal. And so we went back and not only looked at the preference percentages, but we also really dug into the comments. And I think the thing that we found within the comments, as well as follow up with our reopening teams, follow up with just conversations with staff that we wanted to check in with, that a lot of the comments around safety really were tied not necessarily to a schedule, but to the concept of a hybrid. And that's important. It's important for us to understand that, but it didn't necessarily lean in towards a particular schedule. There was some commentary about the concern about cleaning protocols in between sessions. So we dug deeper with that. We definitely brought that up with our district crisis team, which is serving as our general district reopening team at our meeting this week, to address the question: would the afternoon group be disadvantaged in any way? And we couldn't come to the conclusion that they would be, based on the information that we have in front of us. So that was something that we just didn't have enough information to back going in a different direction. And then next, I'll say in terms of the comments in supporting hybrid model A, we heard a lot around this is what our students at the elementary level need. They need more touch points with their teachers. They need consistent routines. They need more consistent check-ins. And they didn't do as well in the remote learning setting, just by the nature of their age. And I think that what hybrid model A does for our elementary teachers and our students is it provides more of an organized approach to the day. It provides an opportunity for students and families to create schedules and routines, just by nature of the concrete way in which elementary students think that if they're going to school, that means it's a day of learning and they're physically reporting. We worried about the concept of elementary students being out of the buildings 3 days if they were in cohort A, Monday, Tuesday, and then potentially being out of the building until that following Monday. I also wanted to just touch upon the instructional component as well. The work that we started in terms of our curriculum across the elementary level before the closure was really focused on alignment and prioritizing what we should be teaching when across the elementary level. We really feel that this model will support that equity piece in terms of what our students will be exposed to. And in terms of planning for teachers, one of the comments that I read that I felt that I think made all of us feel better was, I feel like I can wrap my head instructionally around hybrid model A. I understand that I would plan for group A, and then that same plan would be repeated for cohort B, and then the remote expectations would be less. They would be more asynchronous. They would be extension activities from what was taught live that day, or they would be students accessing online curriculum resources. And I think we can't disregard the opinions that we heard from our parents and our elementary staff about how challenging it was to really reach this age level of students in the spring. Last, I'll talk about the last piece in terms of comments was that there was concern expressed. We're hearing from the state, we're hearing across other districts our need to bring in and focus on our vulnerable populations. And I think our group has done a nice job of really talking about what that means and how we would do that. And what does that invitation look like? So we're talking about our students with disabilities, we're talking about our students, our English learners, students with low socioeconomic status. We don't want to set up a structure that segregates groups and just invites those groups in. We want to set up a structure where all students have access and we can discreetly extend their day and supplement around a general schedule. We feel like the hybrid model A allows us to do that. It allows us to bring all of our students in and then supplement around that and potentially extend days for students as they need it. So that really, was just I felt like I needed to provide more context to the elementary level, just because if you look right at the numbers, it's very close across staff, it's very close across parents in terms of preference. And this is a moment where I think as a leadership team, we had to dig deeper and really, at the end of the day, decide what was best for our students and put forward that model, all the while being safe and within guidelines that are backed by our Board of Health as well as the DESE guidelines. So then I'll just touch upon the Wednesday versus Friday. This came up as a really good point to consider at the last meeting. The elementary original proposal had pushed, it had our students coming in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, with full remote learning happening on Friday, as well as teacher planning and collaboration. One of the things that was brought up in comparing the Galvin and the high school schedules, which both have a full remote day on Wednesday, is would it be possible for families, as much as possible, to try to align their schedules, to maybe consider moving that to Wednesday. And the parent survey leaned towards Friday, the staff survey leaned towards Wednesday. We do think that moving the full remote day to Wednesday might be a move that we want to make. We're proposing that tonight, just in terms of the concerns around cleaning. It gives a midpoint deep clean opportunity, and it will allow families to have a full remote day on Wednesdays across the district if there are siblings. I will also just touch upon, in terms of alignment, the cohort placement piece. There was a lot of concern from families around, will my kids be kept together? And that is, in talking to the elementary principals, it's a commitment that we will make. Elementary siblings will be kept together. They need to be kept in the same cohort. We wouldn't want our elementary siblings to be spread across two sections. So if you have a sibling, we can't guarantee alignment with Galvin in the high school, but if you have a sibling at the elementary level, we're going to keep families together. And then we're going to dig into this, yep, that one right there, this slide a little bit further into the presentation. But another piece of our family data was that we wanted to get a sense of how many of our families would be choosing the full remote option. And we talked about that the last time, that all of our families, regardless if the district moves forward with a hybrid, will have the option to choose a full remote learning option. And the initial data we got from that out of at the elementary level, out of 883 families, we had 138 say they would be opting for full remote. Out of 561 responses at Galvin, there were 77 families, and 571 high school responses, we had 57 families say that they would be choosing that option.
Hey, Kara.
Yeah.
For clarity, is it families or is that a count of kids?
So that would be
That's survey
the student.
responders.
So it was parents that responded for their student, if they would be choosing for their student at that level. Does that make sense?
So is it, because you said families, so is that number representing students? I think it's representing
It's
students.
students, yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, yep. Absolutely. So are there any other questions related to the survey slides before we move on to the recommendation from the school committee? Okay. All right, so I'll send it back over to Doug.
So based on the survey data, this evening we are recommending a plan. We're recommending a hybrid plan with a phased-in approach that would allow for flexibility very similar to the governor's plan around reopening the economy, right? You don't get stuck in one spot. You move, and we're able to move and respond to the public health data and to the situation that might arise in your community to keep people safe, right? And this comes up a lot around, well, what does that mean? For example, back on March 12th, when, we were first learning about COVID and kind of how it was transmitted and how quickly it was transmitted and how unsafe things felt, we decided to close schools early. We did it ahead of the governor's request to quarantine and shut everything down. And we did that to keep our students safe, to keep our families safe, and to keep our community safe, right? And so I think, and I bring that up because if we need to do that again, if we need to make a decision that's good for Wakefield, we will do that. And if we need to make a decision around a classroom, and we need to quarantine a teacher and or students in the classroom because one may be COVID positive, we'll do that, right? And so, but since March, we've actually learned quite a bit. I don't think anyone would have imagined that we are where we are now. But I think people in Massachusetts, us included, have done a pretty good job, keeping ourselves safe and keeping others safe. Everyone wears masks, and we will require everyone to wear masks pre-K through post. So the recommendation that we'll be making this evening is for a hybrid plan, K through 12, which will allow so the hybrid plan, and the reason we're recommending a hybrid is to reduce the number of students attending school so that we can keep people socially distant, right? We're also recommending this model because we feel like it can be executed in a safe way. And the phased-in approach really allows for this level of flexibility, like I referred to a moment ago, around similar to the opening of the economy. We can go in one direction or we can go in another. We can move toward inviting more students in, or we could scale it back and keep it small, or we could go all remote, right? And so that's what we're recommending this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what the calendar looks like for students. So we get this question often, right? So what does that mean in terms of phased reopening and a calendar? So day one for teachers, based on the calendar that was agreed upon last year, was September 2nd. The school year has been reduced from 180 days to 170 days by the Commissioner of Education to allow for 10 days to do safety training and professional development for teachers to start the school year. Day one for students would be September 17th, 2020, right? And we are sharing just 2 months of the calendar this evening in these slides. So phase one for us would be, as I mentioned, teacher training, safety training and professional development, and that would run for 10 days. Phase two, it's designed to run for 8 days with conditions, and that's an important piece, with conditions. And then hybrid phase 3 would be a movement to inviting more students back to participating for some time in person and some time remote during the week. So we thought it would be a good idea just to kind of represent this in a calendar, or what it looks like in September and October. So what we are proposing, and this is a proposal that has not been kind of accepted yet, but what we are proposing is in the first week of September, that normally we have the Friday before Labor Day off. And what we're going to propose is that we add an additional day in the first week, and it could be the 1st of September, or it could be the 4th. It's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right? But what this would do is this would allow us to start phase 2 on the 17th. So the first 10 days would be professional development and training. On the 17th, all students would start phase 2, with the majority of our students starting remotely. And that's by design, right? We want to start with a remote plan because the remote plan is kind of the backbone of the hybrid plan, right? And we also want to start before we need to start, right? We always talk about being flexible and being able to adapt and being able to pivot in a moment's notice for safety reasons. So if for any reason we needed to go from whatever plan we are in back to a full remote, what this would do is it would allow us to move back to a full remote, but it would also allow us to make relationships with students before we needed to move back to a full remote. It would allow us to do a technology audit with families to make sure all students and families have devices, to make sure that they had wireless access, to make sure that they're able to log on and able to kind of get their curriculum and their textbooks, to make sure they understand what their expectations of their teacher are. So we feel like this is really an important piece and has really nice potential. It also allows us, phase 2 also allows us to kind of bring in and continue the service that we've provided in the summer for students that we've offered service to in our extended year program. It would provide an opportunity during phase 2, which is 8 days long, to bring in small groups of students, not just special education students, but students that have never been in our school system before, our pre-K and K students, our 5th grade students at Galvin that have never been at the middle school, right? It's a pretty daunting, pretty big building to go into when you're 10 years old, right? We know what that's like. And what this phase 2 allows us to do is it could allow us to bring in small groups of students and acclimate them and teach them kind of who their teams are, who their teachers are, and again, gives us an opportunity to make relationships, okay? And when we're cycling small groups in, they would be working with teachers, and when we cycle them out, they would have remote assignments. And so I also want to highlight in phase 2 the changes that are at the bottom of this slide. We're expanding phase 2. In our initial presentation, phase 2 was 2 days. And the reason it was 2 days is because we were kind of rushing to instruction because we thought that was the expectation of the Commissioner of Education. And it is. But with this adjustment, we can still meet that expectation and really more effectively meet the needs of kids. And I would argue meet the needs of staff as well. And I'll talk about that. And so all students would start remotely on September 17th. Small groups starting in person on September 17th. And again, I talked about pre-K, K students in small groups. And it would also allow us to continue to review public health data, which is really a critical part of these phases, right? So phase 3, on September 22nd, it will actually be a daily occurrence for us to kind of look at public health data. But on September 22nd, our plan would be to review public health data, including the Massachusetts DPH COVID-19 metric, that was just released yesterday by the Commissioner of Education and the Governor. And this would allow us to gauge our readiness to move from phase 2 to phase 3. And if it's not safe, or there is an increase in occurrences in terms of the transmission of the virus in Wakefield or of surrounding districts, if we're looking at trends, we would adjust, right? But what this does is it creates a kind of a specific intent to be flexible and to adapt to the situation that presents. I also want to note, I think it's important to note that the changes that have been made in phase 2 have really kind of come from principals and teacher leaders, including our WEA leaders, which we really feel good about. And while we're in phase 2, we will continue to pay attention to any changing information that would allow us to expand programming that includes extracurricular activities and athletics. So I mentioned the DPH COVID-19 metric. So the commissioner had a press conference yesterday. This was unveiled to superintendents at 11 o'clock in the morning yesterday, to school committees at 1 p.m., and then later in the day, the governor released this to the public. And so one of the things that I think we're hearing from pretty clearly from state leadership is everyone should be on the same page in regard to metrics that they're using to gauge whether they're able to go back to school. There are always other considerations that you have to take into account and have to pay attention to, but just as a guide, what we're being kind of provided here is an opportunity to understand the average daily cases per 100,000, right, which is a metric that is used and passed around state to state, right? And so it gauges communities as unshaded, green, yellow, or red. And so in the right-hand column on this slide, you'll see DESE expectations for a learning model. That is a recommendation, right? That is a guide, not something that is hard and fast. There are always exceptions to this. But what they share is that if the average daily cases are greater than 8 per 100,000, you would be in the red, and your school district should be in a remote plan. If your average daily cases per 100,000 are between 4 and 8, they would rate your community in the yellow category, and you could be in hybrid or remote. And if your average daily cases are less than 4 per 100,000, you would be in green. And if you have fewer than 5 cases over the past 14 days, they would say you're unshaded with the same recommendation, which is they would recommend that you are either in a full in-person or a hybrid plan, okay? And so these are just general guidelines. And so, the really other considerations that we need to pay attention to are cases that are increasing and decreasing in our community and also in surrounding communities. So regardless of the guideline in regard to our community indicator, for example, if there were a student or an adult that tested positive, or more than one that tested positive in a given school, we would take action on that. We would coordinate our response with the Board of Health and the Department of Public Health, and we would respond accordingly to quarantine, get people tested, and also keep larger groups of students that have not come in contact with these personnel safe. So it's also critical to look at multiple kind of weeks of data to track trends, and we also need to look at and pay attention to student contact and trends that are happening across the district in terms of students interacting. And so this is a map of Massachusetts. Wakefield, I think, is situated right in around here. We are in the green, which is positive. So the recommendation in the green, as I shared here, in the green, it's full in person or hybrid. So we feel like we cannot bring people back for a full in-person and also execute safety precautions. So that wouldn't be an option for us. But a hybrid is absolutely an option, and that's what we're recommending this evening.
I can take over that transition, Doug.
Actually, can we pause
do you wanna pause for
potentially for questions?
Sure.
'Cause I feel like we've gone through a lot. Can we go back to the calendar for
Sure.
a second? So until I was sitting here, I did not, I had seen this calendar previously, earlier today, and I suspect that other people might be saying, that seems a little strange that you're gonna have the 28th be, that we start on a Tuesday, not that Monday. And what jumped out at me on the calendar is that Monday is
Yom
the Jewish
Kippur.
holiday.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think it is important for us to call out the fact that we would not ever start the first day of hybrid learning on a day when families and staff might be celebrating a high holiday.
That's not what we're recommending.
Right. We are not recommending that.
That's why the
That is
Tuesday.
why it looks the way that it does.
Right.
Correct.
Right? And that, that you would not have the first day back in hybrid, starting hybrid, be a holiday that some students would be excluded from.
It's against our policy. It's a one-time event, right?
Right.
And
And so when you first look at that, you kind of think to yourself, why would you possibly start on a Tuesday until you take that into consideration and it becomes much more clear. And it really did not hit me until just now. So I thought that that was important to share because the optics of that, when you look at it visually, it looks a little strange.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to stop, because last time you guys had like questions where we kind of stopped and paused. I know you're getting to the presentation, like the actual recommendation and changes in the recommendation. So I don't know if anybody else has questions about the calendar. Maybe this is a good time for that discussion, but that maybe nothing other than that would we want to dive into now. So I guess
Anything else?
calendar questions from committee members. No, we got nothing. Okay.
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 All right, so I'll start the transition just to be speaking about the revisions made at each level. Would you like, I think it actually might help in a couple of ways if after each level update that we stop for questions, and then I'm sure the principals would be okay if I let them off the call after their level. So I think that if that works for the committee, can that be the structure? Okay, great. All right, so we're going to start with the Doyle update, and we went over the schedule that we were proposing for the Doyle last time around, and this time we're lucky to have our principal Shannon Blacker here with us, who's done some great work with her reopening team as well. Just to speak to, there's not a lot of changes, but there's more information related to the Doyle proposal. So I'd like to let Shannon unmute and give her a second and speak to some of the talking points on this slide. So go ahead, Shannon.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here to talk about the Doyle. So I am just kind of going over the updates about the Doyle. So the first is that we're keeping the schedule the same as presented at the last school committee meeting. So we're proposing the 4 days, Monday through Thursday, and a half day Friday. We are working on some schedule things that are going on, like staggered arrival and dismissal times, lunch, etc., because we are going the full days. So our committee is working on those logistics right now to get out to the community. We are going to follow the phased-in approach that the district is proposing, even at the Doyle, prioritizing our special education population, coming in small groups, and our returning families and siblings. So that was discussed last week in our parent forum, and that will continue to happen. There is a lottery that is going to be tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. Information was sent out tonight via school messenger, so parents should have received that for all of our new families, for any open tuition spots that will be available after we receive all of our data coming in from our returning families and siblings. There will not be any remote learning for the preschool level, and as stated last week, it's just not the best practice unless we need to go fully remote. So that was why we're going with 4 full days and a half day for our students. And we are going to, next year, we will prioritize for the those families who do not get in into the school this year during the lottery. We are going to keep record of those families so we can prioritize them next year during our registration process to hopefully get them in for the following year.
Great.
So I think the next slide is just the schedule that we are proposing. It's a rough estimate of the schedule. Obviously, we have some work to do around all the specifics around bathroom breaks and mask breaks and whatnot, but I think that's exactly the same schedule that was set forth last week. Are there any questions for me?
Any questions for Shannon? All right.
Colleen?
Oh, I can't see anyone. So.
Oh, yeah, we can
Thanks.
see
Thanks, Shannon. If you could, yeah. All right, there. Now we can see everybody again.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Colleen.
How are you?
Good.
Just a few questions that we may have not heard at our last meeting, given that we didn't have you here. So thank you so much for being able to join us. But can you just describe what contact looks like at this level under the current restrictions? I think that we have a lot of questions, especially at this level, given the close contact of the students and the close contact of the staff with the students, and just the nature of the preschool model, what it looks like in general. That's obviously a part of your day and a largely important part of your day.
Sure. So we operate our classrooms, our integrated classrooms. So with this opening, we are anticipating roughly 8 to 11 students in classrooms, no more than 4 special education students in a classroom. So we're looking at a 60-40 type ratio in all of our integrated classrooms. As far as contact with students and what a classroom will look like, so our plan is to do 6 feet distancing when possible, 3 feet at other times. We are expecting children to wear masks. Staff members will be wearing masks as well as shields, some staff members as well as shields. We have also purchased shields for all the children to be able to take mask breaks when possible, when we are 6 feet apart in particular. We do plan on using our playgrounds safely. We have 2 playgrounds, so we can socially distance 11 on each playground, 1 classroom at a time. As far as the close contact that we may have with students, I see that we're going to do our best and of what we can do to keep our distance. But what we have learned through some of the summer school already, it's very difficult when there is a child that's having a transition difficulty or separation anxiety with their parents, that we are at times having to use hands-on with children. And we know that at our level. We plan on wearing our gloves and PPEs if needed, if staff are not comfortable being with the students. There are students who require one-to-one support, so I will be talking with those students, families, and staff members working with them.
So in saying that, Shannon, that your staff members understand sort of what is expected at this level, and they can make that choice whether to engage in that or not, or you provide sort of an alternative. And I understand that your PPE at that level is higher level than what we might see in our general classrooms in the other schools.
Correct. We've started the conversations. We haven't gone in depth around, the specifics around. We know we have PPEs. What we've learned is that the PPEs are very difficult when you're hands-on with the children, to be in a gown and whatnot. So it's going to be a comfort level among staff. So those conversations still need to be had with our staff.
Okay, you answered the second question, so thank you. That was about ratio and then just how many students we're allowing in each classroom. And so another question that had come up was, do you feel that this population, and especially the vulnerable population of students that you have at this level, they can participate in a full day? I'm thinking that it's a positive environment for them to be in because they are vulnerable, and these are students that have lacked this type of support in the spring. But I just didn't know if you could speak to that, whether this full day option for them is absolutely, necessary within the specific precautions that you just mentioned.
So we have felt as a team, the reopening team, that we can provide a full day as long as we do some creative ways around the mask breaks, getting children outside as much as possible, even learning to take place outside with the little ones. There's a lot we can do. Our teachers have already thought of amazing ideas on how to keep kids distant from one another and also give them the breaks that they need. Naturally, in our school day, we already have some breaks built in where we do 2 smaller recesses and we have a lunch break and we do a rest time. So all of those break times will be times where they can be mask free or use a shield instead of a mask. So we do anticipate. We also work with families individually, just naturally, for all families even before COVID, on if the child cannot.
Is that your little one, right?
I have a 4-year-old myself. So if a child, is having difficulty transition, we always work on a plan with a, working out a plan if, they need to transition slowly. So we've had families contact us and say they only can last an hour. And then we have families who say they can last the 5.5 hours. And we work with those families. We start them at an hour and we work up to the full day. And we adjust things as needed per individual. Everything at the Doyle is very individualized, even with kids who are not identified.
Right.
So we do feel as though we can do it safely, and we plan on doing the phased-in approach so we can see how it goes with our most vulnerable population first before we bring back all.
Great. Thank you, Shannon.
Shannon, this is Mike Burr. I had a kind of a 2-part question for you. How exactly are you going to handle recess for these kids as well as lunch?
So our reopening team just started working on lunch today. We have purchased plexiglass for our tables that we use at Doyle in the classrooms, so we can put 2 children at a table, and we have 4 or 5 tables in every classroom. We are also then, 2 children at those tables. If we can fit 8 children, 2 children will be the children that have picnic lunches, and we will rotate kids. So we plan on having picnic lunches we have mats that we use in our classrooms. So that's how we're handling lunch. We are also asking parents to brown bag lunch, as much disposable lunch items as possible. And I have a call in with our food services director to work out a plan for students who may need lunches from the district. So that's how we're handling lunch. And cleaning protocols before and after are going to be put in place. For recess, the guidance is that we clean surface areas on our playgrounds daily at the end of the day. We also plan on having our staff do some wipe downs after recess of high touch surfaces. So like railings and things like that. We have some creative ideas on making sure staff are, have wipes on them at all times so they can quickly wipe down surfaces. So we plan on having a rotated schedule that I will manage, having every class have a scheduled time for recess. So we're only having 1 class at a time on a playground before the next class comes out and can be sanitized a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions in regards to the Doyle? Okay, looks like none, so Kara.
Okay. All right, thank you, Shannon, and feel free to move off the call. I know you have to go. Thank you, Shannon, for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we're going to move into the elementary, and I spoke a bit about elementary and the conversations we've been having when we went through the survey data. Before I have Matt Carter and Tiffany back, who are back here again tonight, speak more so, I think, zoned in on the instructional side, I did just want to hit on some of these talking points that had come up in either parent forums or comments or feedback within emails or the surveys from staff. And safety, like I said, that did come up, the safety piece, wanting to ensure that we were following safety guidelines. There are a lot of questions around cleaning protocols. We're really focused in on making sure that we have sufficient time to clean in between cohorts. We're working closely with Bob Shiroli, our facilities director, who is currently looking into cleaning crews, increasing custodial staff, and making sure that we have a solid plan for all high-touch surfaces to turn the building around for each cohort. And as I said earlier, all of our plans have been reviewed by the Board of Health and have also matched our DESI guidance that we've received as well. So again, that we're continuing to gain more information around that, and we'll continue to work with the facilities department. I don't want to move past the childcare needs that were brought up as well. That was a big point of concern from our families, just in terms of particularly working parents and managing the half-day schedule. So I will say, everything's going in phases. Our planning is going in phases as well. And as we've created this general structure that we're proposing tonight, the planning doesn't stop. And we've worked closely with Estelle Burdick, our director of academy, along the way, who's really zoning in on our K through 6 population and how our Wakefield Academy or other community groups can support our working families and potentially at least get to the point of having extended day or at least a full school day. And the time piece was another that the 2.5-hour half day felt short. I think we will keep in mind. I'll leave some of this to Matt and Tiffany to hit on, but I just think that is also a refining point for us to try to ideally get those blocks to 3 hours. And then I talked about vulnerable populations. So I just wanted to hit on some of the district things first that we're working on before passing it over to Matt and Tiffany. So I can do that now.
Thank you, Kara. So one of the things you'll notice on our schedule is that we have taken the times off. Part of the reason was the discussions that we were having with families, but also our staff as well, that were concerned about kind of the length of time that a child would be in school and what they would be learning kind of during those blocks. So we are still kind of in conversation around how do we stretch those timeframes out. I think the 2.5 hours would create a challenge, especially with us trying to fit in all that we would during the day. So is it possible to stretch that to 3 hours? And I think that's an ongoing conversation right now, and something that we still need to circle back and answer that question solidly. The other feedback we're receiving is around kind of, can those time blocks be focused on core subjects, so reading, writing, and math specifically? I think the answer to that is yes. And then we need to take kind of those other learning opportunities that we had outlined a week ago and move those into more of a remote setting. So when I say that, I'm talking more about science, social studies, and specialists. So that was one of the really big conversations that we had this past week, and it was strictly based off of feedback from both families and from staff.
And I'll just reiterate, we spoke about last week the developmental appropriateness of this, thinking specifically about our elementary learners. And you actually heard Shannon Blacker bring it up as well with the Doyle. They're avoiding remote learning completely unless the whole district is remote. We are, at the elementary level, trying to reduce the impact of the remote learning. So by having students in school each day, the things that we're asking them to do remotely are going to be things that they are more likely to be able to do independently, or teachers will have directly worked with them. It's going to lessen the demands on the families for that burden of remote learning, which is when we're looking at that alternative hybrid B model, it increased the amount of remote learning. And so we still had some questions about it, which is why we ultimately came back to A, knowing that we still have things that we need to look at and we still have refinements that we need to make for that schedule.
Great. Thank you so much, Tiffany and Matt. I feel that we've hit on a lot of the revisions. The elementary reopening teams have worked so hard, and there's been a lot to consider and a lot of really good discussion, which I think landed us back to this point. So if we want to open it up to questions around elementary.
Yep. Mike?
So Matt and Tiffany, a question. obviously trying to extend a day from 2.5 hours to say 3 hours, there's really only a few options. You either start earlier, you end later, or you shorten the cleaning time. I'm just sort of curious, do you see the cleaning time, which I think initially we had scheduled, was it an hour and a half for the last version? Something like that.
Right.
Obviously, a lot of classrooms to do, bathrooms, and what constitutes cleaning, how much do you clean during that time? So are all three options realistically open as far as adjusting the time frame?
So I would say that that block in the middle of the day not only is about cleaning, but if you think about it, since teachers are going to be teaching in the morning and the afternoon, that's what their lunchtime has to happen in there, their prep time has to happen in there, because as Matt said, we've moved the specialists now to that virtual remote area. So specialists won't be happening during the school day, which is when teachers would be able to, a different time, teachers would be able to get their prep. So I think that block of time, we need to leave that. But as for, starting earlier, going later, those are all subject to negotiation.
Yeah.
Sure, understood, thank you.
And Mike, we can just add to that on our end too, that, the start and end times as well. Like Tiffany said, we're looking at digging further into our transportation needs as well. And then we're looking at how we're gonna structure that full remote day and what the expectations for remote learning will be for our elementary students on that full day, and just make sure that those are appropriate, but also give our teachers time for planning and collaboration. Yep, Susie?
So I've got two questions, one around the cleaning. You mentioned a while back about the crisis team being a part of the discussion and kind of knowing what the plan is.
Yeah.
Is the Department of Health a part of the crisis team?
So Ruth Clay is a part of our district crisis team and reopening, which we're using as our district reopening group.
Yep.
And she hasn't been at every meeting, but she was most recently at our last meeting this past week. Tom Walsh is also a part of that from the emergency management department as well. So we have a wide variety of community representation on that group. So Ruth was on the call this past week, and we talked a little bit about, oh, is she here?
Yeah.
She's here
Oh, hi,
tonight.
Ruth. I didn't even see you right there. Great. So if you'd like to speak, Ruth.
Yeah, I guess
don't
my
wanna take
question
time.
is, does Ruth have a particular, I'm getting a lot of feedback about people being concerned about those 90 minutes. Can you get it done? Do we have enough staff? Is it going to be effective?
Right.
And to me, it would be helpful if Ruth has a perspective on it and feels comfortable stating kind of how she feels about that plan, or if you don't, Ruth, because you don't have enough information, that's fair also. But I think it would be good to hear from kind of from that perspective, the feeling of that on that piece of the plan.
Sure.
Sure. So first, I just want to apologize for coming on late, but the Board of Health was actually meeting earlier tonight, so I was there first, remotely. So, and they would also just wanted me to remind you all that there's a difference between the Board of Health and the Health Director. So I'm not speaking for the board because the plan has not been reviewed or commented on by the board. This is just me. So I have been in a couple of the meetings, and as far as the logistics of, I'm not going to speak to how much time it takes. I don't know. That's up to how many people there are cleaning, will depend on how long it takes. What I have been trying to emphasize with the planning group is that I hear everybody's concerns. I get that people are concerned about cleaning and sanitizing. However, there are no documented cases of COVID-19 by somebody touching something that's not clean. People get COVID-19 person to person, right? By not wearing a mask, being too close, etc. And so I feel like that's what we really should be looking at, as we should be looking at the risk factors that have been proven to be how people get sick. I'm not saying to ignore the cleaning and sanitizing, but I feel like that there's maybe an excess amount of concern. I think we need to spend our time in the parts of the plan that actually make people safe. And I'm comfortable with, that they'll be using the guidance, the CDC and the state health departments, cleaning guidance. That is the guidance, that's the standard right now. So that part I'm comfortable with. We don't go home and clean and sanitize our entire house or clean and sanitize everywhere else we go out. So again, this is a segment of somebody's day, not the majority of somebody's day. So we need to look at this holistically as reducing risk, but reducing the whole risk.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Thank you, Ruth.
My second question was about the wraparound services and the work that Estelle is doing. I think that is a really critical piece for families to be able to decide what they're going to do. And particularly if your recommendation is hybrid plan A, and if a parent is trying to decide, are they going that route or are they going fully remote? If they knew that there were wraparound services, my guess is that they're going to choose the hybrid model. Do we have a sense of when you might have more detail for parents on those wraparound services?
Yeah, probably by the end of next week.
Okay.
Right, because it's going to take us time to understand, where the students are going to be, right? And so some students are going to be in all remote. Some students are going to be participating or willing to participate in a hybrid, right? And so I know Ruth Clay is working in partnership with Dan McGrath, the rec department, right?
Ruth is or
I'm
Estelle?
sorry, Estelle.
Okay.
I'm sorry, my mistake. And so Estelle is working with Dan McGrath in partnership. And so, and we're looking at different spaces and also different partners to expand that, right? So she's looking at or talking with the Boys and Girls Club.
Awesome.
And so there'll be more information forthcoming by the end of next week.
But it is, I think, coming out of last week, and the difference now to me is that there's an understanding that is a priority for us to figure out for families.
Absolutely. And I think, but I do think with the understanding that, like everything else, we've had to really narrow down and prioritize what we can offer families. And that's unfortunate for us. We like to, if we could go back to how we supported our families in the past with, early morning drop-off, open until 6 p.m. And, unfortunately, I just want to be clear that we're going to do everything we can to supplement, like we said, hopefully to a full school day for families. But I think that the super extended hours and, the amount of kids that we can support in a space is going to look different. But that's why I think, like Doug said, we're trying to tap into other community partners as best we can to support families. And I really think everyone has just done a nice job of coming together and trying to figure out what we can do for our town.
Thank you.
I have one more question for Tiffany and Matt, and it's about Wednesdays. As to how you envision Wednesday, what's a typical day at the Dolbear on a Wednesday, and is Wednesday perhaps an option if you had to lengthen the other days, you shorten Wednesday to kind of make it all equal at the end, or is that off the table? So what's Wednesdays like, and how can you use Wednesdays effectively?
So
you practically answered your own question.
I think it depends a lot in terms of how that negotiation kind of shakes out, because I do foresee kind of that time piece coming up. But also Wednesday, I don't envision being a day that wouldn't have some level of synchronous learning taking place. So I envision teacher check-ins with students, preferably in small group, and then kind of working through kind of things and getting set for the next day for them to come in and continue learning. Because one of the things we are giving up in this plan is not having those 4 consecutive in-person days. But I think it makes sense when we want to align ourselves more with what the middle school and high school have proposed. And we heard that loud and clear from families as well in terms of planning and scheduling. So that was a change we made. But yeah, to Tiffany's point, I think you answered your question.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Matt or Tiffany before we move on?
No.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Oh, go ahead, Doug.
No, I was going to say thank you, Matt. Thank you, Tiffany.
Okay, so now I will pass it over. Adam Colantoni from Galvin is here with us just to give a follow-up from his presentation of the Galvin schedule last week.
Thank you, Tara. I wasn't sure if you're going to read any slides.
Oh, yeah, I mean, so yours are more pointed as opposed to, I feel like the elementary, I led with that because there were some real, district things that we were talking about as a group. The slide, oh, it would help if we moved to that slide. Is that what you're saying? You were nicely cueing me for it, Adam, and I didn't pick up on it. Yeah, so the slides on the Galvin piece, I think you can definitely speak better to me just in terms of the big target areas around cohort split and lunch. So I'll let you talk to those.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. It's great to be back. I want to tell, if there are any fifth graders watching school committee, the Galvin's not that daunting, contrary to what Superintendent Lyons said a while back. We're a pretty friendly place for you to be. So I want to thank all our Galvin families for the thoughtful feedback and questions over the last week. We were able to host 2 forums last week. One for our Galvin Middle School, kind of general population, and then a second forum for our 5th grade families. And we intend to continue those forums with our 5th grade families as well. So really the biggest feedback for us that jumped out was just families asking us to consider the sibling split. And we started with the 5, 6, 7, 8 in our hybrid model because it felt like the most logical place to start developmentally with the age groups and also with how we were thinking of using our staff and space. But we did listen to the feedback, and we went back and really looked closely at the sibling distribution. Mr. Tetrault in particular spent a lot of time on IPASS and kind of reviewing family breakdowns. And we did come to realize that there are a lot more families with a 5, 7, 6, 8 split of siblings by a substantial amount, as you can see on the slide. So it would be our recommendation tonight to tweak our model to go from a 5, 6 on Monday, Tuesday to a 5, 7 on Monday, Tuesday. And then to a 6, 8 on Thursday, Friday. And we hope that that can accommodate a greater amount of families, knowing that there still were families that have the 5, 6, 7, 8 split. And just by the nature of our model, we weren't going to be able to accommodate every family at the Galvin. So we tried to do the greatest good that we could with the sibling distribution. So I don't know if I can pause there and respond to any questions that the committee has.
It doesn't look like anyone has any questions, so you can continue, Adam.
Great. So the other piece of feedback in concerns and questions, which is understandable. And Carrie, if you could pull that slide back up, that would be great.
Sure. Can you not? It's up. I just don't know if. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. So in our plan, we are making an effort to feed our students lunch if we can do it safely. So at our Galvin forums, we were able to go into deeper detail than I was able to on the school committee meeting last week. And also, Danielle Collins, our food service director, is here with us tonight as well, so she can jump into this conversation for any of the members that have questions for her. We have over the last week been reviewing our school lunch plan. And to kind of just clarify things, we're actually able to provide a space during lunches that has greater social distancing than in the classroom. By using the gym and the CAF, there are much bigger open spaces, and we're able to space out student desks that students would be having lunch at. The visual of students eating lunch in a cafeteria and CAF tables is not what we're aiming for. We're using individual desks in our CAF, our gym, and certainly want to utilize outside in the fall as well to get students outside. And so we have 3 really big seating areas where we can spread students out at a greater distance than they would be in their classroom. We also, I just kind of reiterate, we have 15 minutes between our lunch groups. At no point in time would we have two-way traffic coming to any of the lunch spaces. And in working with Danielle, it's really kind of how things can be as touchless as possible for students in terms of going through a line. We've been marking out social distance spacing in the cafeteria for students that are ordering lunch. So I would like to give Danielle an opportunity. She took time to join us tonight, so I'd love for her to jump in as well.
Hi there. So if I could speak to that just a little bit. Adam and I walked through the schools and the hallways, and we measured out the spaces. And, what we envision is that will be controlling the flow of students. If we have the cohorts grouped and their numbers are smaller, we'll be able to have fewer children passing through the halls at any one time, fewer children passing through the lines. Our vision basically entails the child entering the cafeteria space, sanitizing their hands, going through the cafeteria line. Well, we'll have plexiglass and protection there available. Selecting the lunch, everything will be contained in that package. If they're purchasing a salad, it will have a fork and a knife right in the container so that, you know, they don't need to go and get additional things in order to consume their lunch. They'll pass through the line. We'd like to do completely cashless, you know, prepaid on the accounts, so there's no contact with the cashier, but also with the safety and effectiveness of going through the point of service to verify all allergies, to make sure our children are safe, and also give them the, they have to be offered a choice of milk. So although our lunches will be self-contained, whatever milk they select, we'll be handing it. We don't really touch them. We'll be putting it on a counter. They'll be accepting it. They go over to their individual seating chair and table, and they remove their mask because they have 6 feet of space. They actually have quite a bit more than 6 feet of space based on those numbers. They are able to eat their lunch, and you know, Adam came up with this great idea to play a little bit of music and keep it fun in there. So for these kids, I think it will be wonderful, actually. And once they're done eating, everything is contained. They go and they put their mask back on. They throw away everything that they needed for their lunch, and they sanitize on their way out to the space. And with the design and the planning that went into this, we actually have talked about entry spaces and exit spaces so that we have one-way traffic to control the flow, because we do see that as one of the larger challenges. Honestly, the spaces are very wide. It's well thought out, and it's very safe. I love the idea of having the 3 different spaces because we can rotate that and make it a little you know, interesting for kids, while once again keeping them safe and allowing them to really have their lunch. You know, I can't say enough. Food insecurity right now is at an all-time high in the state of Massachusetts, and these kids are at such a, you know, as from a nutritional standpoint, this is the age group where these kids really need that nourishment. So once again, you know, we're very excited to be able to offer a safe lunch to our students. But I'm happy to field any questions that anyone may have.
I have a question. It doesn't really have to do with food service, Danielle, and certainly Ruth's comment about, you know, the cleaning services, is it the top priority? And I assume you're gonna have a crowd of people with Lysol wipes coming around during the 15-minute break to do that. Is that true?
Yes. So actually the cleaning protocols, the chemical that it takes a little longer to actually ensure that all the spaces are clean and sanitized. That's the reason why we've asked for the 15-minute lead time between any lunch period to allow full cleaning of the spaces. You've absolutely hit on it. We have to make sure that those spaces are cleaned between sessions.
And then my last question is broader than even the middle school, is how are we handling bathrooms across the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school? You know, are we gonna have someone limiting the amount of people that go into a bathroom? How is that gonna be monitored?
Well, I can't speak to that.
No, I know, it's not yours, Danielle.
Okay.
Mike, I can jump in. Depending on the school and the class and the size of the bathroom, we're pretty much going to limit 2 students per bathroom, except for the Greenwood, where the schools the bathrooms are a little larger and we can space out. But in all the other bathrooms in schools, we're going to limit 2 to 3 students per bathroom.
Thanks, Bob.
Yep.
Susie?
Yep. So I've got a couple questions about lunch. So Adam, did you say classroom, gym, and cafeteria, or not classroom? Just
Not classroom.
Okay.
In the current plan, it would be the cafeteria, the gym, and as weather allows, outside. And if we can't use outside, the gym is very large. It has curtains that pull down that serve as actual dividers to have a second space. Today, we actually use all the curtains to create 4 quadrants in the gym to have 4 separate locations. in the gym. If you've ever been in there for youth basketball, you can see how the curtains work. But in the gym with 4 curtains set up for the quadrants, with that, we're allowed to have a group of 15 students in a cohort come down with plenty of room well beyond 6 feet between them in that space.
So
we're really fortunate to have such a great facility here, to be honest, and we just want to utilize it.
So the cohort will stay together in that quarter of the room. So those right, there will be no mingling of kids.
Correct.
Okay.
The one finer detail that we'll continue to work out with our reentry team and our staff is just kind of the way we escort students down in layers to get to their lunch destination. Part of our plan is for the teachers to walk students to their assigned lunch space where we'll be supervising with administration and other staff. And then teachers will come back and pick up their cohort. So really just the inner workings of students getting to their lunch destination being chaperoned.
Got it.
I also want to reiterate, this is really their one big movement break during the day for our middle schoolers.
Right.
Our current plan has them pretty self-contained during the day to limit intermingling and kind of for us to keep a really close eye on things beginning of the year. So we see this as their, really kind of their substantial movement break during the day to get up and walk around a little bit.
Perfect. My second question is around the change to the 5768 and the original thinking of trying to keep, like-aged kids together, particularly with 5th graders being, relatively young, kind of heading into the middle school. But my sense is that you are going to be taking advantage of the entire school and therefore will still be able to keep 7th and 5th graders very much separated. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Susie. That's a great point. We're going to be able to use about 6 entrances to the school in the morning. And so we'll be able to use the Main Street side of the Galvin, where the basketball courts are, for entrances for the 7th grade. And then for the 5th grade, we can use the North Ave Plaza side for entrances. So we've scoped out different entry points for students. In our Galvin forum, we shared a visual, I believe, of the different locations that students will be entering. And so the more we thought about the developmental piece, it's not going to look like a typical school year as far as students intermingling before school on our campus and even within the building. And so we weren't as concerned about that once we gave it more thought.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying, Adam.
You're welcome.
I have a question for Bob in regards to the bathrooms. Who is going to be monitoring if and when the kids go? Is there a staff that's dedicated to doing that?
So that's going to be up for each school to kind of look at and administer and monitor their own schools and hallways and all that regarding bathrooms, social distancing, etc.
Okay, so it's to be determined at this point.
Yeah, and I can answer a little bit. Those are some of the finer details we're working with, again, with our reentry team, and I think the benefit of having those additional days of the staff when we come back is we really have to make sure that there is cohesiveness and a clear protocol across the school in terms of students using bathrooms and how they sign out and things like that. So we really have to do some more work around hallway monitoring and, like Bob said, the amount of students using the bathrooms.
Yep, okay. And then just another quick question, Adam, in regards to students being dropped off at school or our walkers. I mean, if you drop I used to drop my kids off on Richardson Ave and they would cross Main Street, but they were in different grades. So, I mean, are you gonna lay out that plan as well for families so that they know specifically, that it's okay to drop the kids off together and then they separate at some point? Or, I mean, how are you going to monitor groups of students walking into the building, maybe from downtown?
Sure. So once they arrive on campus, the work we'll have to do is create, Mr. Tetrell and I became pretty good at creating videos. So we're thinking of creating some webinars for before school and just helping students understand, parents understand where their team-specific entry will be. So even within a grade level, every team will have their own specific entrance. And so we're going to have to spend time in September, early on, and even late August, with clear communication with students, particularly students that have been used to a certain way of life at the Galvin before school. We're really going to have to reshape our whole before school culture with students. Many of you on the call know that students get dropped off very early and they congregate before school and hang out, and so there's social time for them. We're going to have to reshape that behavior, and students are going to have assigned locations at the Galvin to go to when they get on campus. And so a lot of that will be on our admin responsibility to make sure that communication is made clear to families.
Great, thank you.
I've got one quick follow-up question. Can we assume staggered start times at every school so that families that are dropping their kids off at elementary do not have to worry about how they're getting over to the Galvin?
So that's, I mean, Christina, I don't know if you want to talk about the work you're doing with Dee around transportation.
So that's coming down to the bus routes.
Okay.
So now that we're finalizing the schedules, we're looking at that. But yes, the elementary will not be starting at the same time as the Galvin.
Got it.
Right.
Thank you.
Great. All right, and then just moving along on our slides, the only changes to the Galvin schedule as it was presented last week is the cohort shift on the header at the top of each. Adam, is that fair to say? Just the switch at the top, that it's going to be grades 5 and 7 looking at a Monday, Tuesday, and then grade 6 and 8 looking at an in-person Thursday, Friday?
That would be correct.
Okay. All right, I think we're ready to move on from Galvin. Adam, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice job, Adam.
Okay, so now we have Amy McLeod, our principal of our Wakefield Memorial High School here as well. And again, Amy's going to highlight, she's going to take the time really just to clarify some additional points that came up in feedback and survey data. So I'll pass it over to Amy.
Thank you, Kara. So good evening, everybody. Thank you again for having this opportunity to talk more about what's going to go on at the high school. I think since the last time that we met, we were able to, similar to what the other principals talked about, have some feedback sessions with teachers and parents. Also, I want to thank all the parents who reached out via email. I kept saying this to folks, and I really mean it. The questions and the inquiries that we got really help us to deepen our thinking and refine our planning and kind of think about some of these things that maybe we kind of gloss over as educators and need to go into a little deeper. So this slide kind of shows the major areas that have come up of areas of concern, places that we need to dig into a little bit more at the high school. Again, in regards to our hybrid model, there have been no major changes since the last time we presented, but there are a few things that we are further refining. The first point is about asking us to really think about the difference or clarifying synchronous versus asynchronous learning for students. As you'll notice, and as I talked about last week at the high school, not all of the remote time is synchronous learning. Wednesdays are dedicated to synchronous learning, and the other 2 days are asynchronous. So we talked more about this week, and really we think, given that the long live block of 80 minutes, and then the synchronous time on Wednesdays of a 45-minute block, really gives teachers and students enough time to provide teacher-led engagement opportunities. So those things could be ways that kids could engage in discussions or lit discussions, debates, working on problem sets together as a whole class, a lab investigation. And then when we think about the additional asynchronous time, that would be about 80 minutes per class, right, over 2 days, similar to the synchronous live time in class. We feel like teachers will still be providing students lessons with clear objectives, measurable outcomes, right? And we think that can be useful at the secondary level for a number of reasons. It's another way to deliver information in a way that kids can handle, pre-recorded mini lectures, presentations of slide decks, interactive webinars, information that they can give to students that students can digest. It allows for some pacing and flexibility on the students' part when we need to teach students how to pace themselves and be flexible around that. But we also need to support them, right? Asynchronous does not mean absent. So therefore, the lessons and the material that teachers are giving to students need to have measurable outcomes that can be measured and monitored and supported while students are in this asynchronous learning. So I know we have some work to do. We've heard that feedback clearly. We have some work to do in terms of expectations and guidelines that we lay out for students and for how our departments and our teams of teachers work together to think about what this may look like in their content area or for a particular course. And those expectations, you know, I've been really thinking about some of those questions we need to drill down on with kids. What is the work? How much time should it take? How would it be graded? How is it required? And how can they check in for the teacher with the teacher for help? And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So again, I think our model represents a balance of those two in the first point, and they do look slightly different, but I think it's balanced in a way that will work for high school students. I also think it's important, we heard this in the parent forum a lot, and I want parents who are hearing, watching tonight to hear, this schedule allows us to keep 6 classes with students. So the students, the courses that students selected, they are still going to take in this model. So that includes their core classes, English, math, science, social studies, world language, but it also includes electives, you know, art, music, content electives. So we're not eliminating things from this schedule. We will be offering health and wellness remotely, and we are working on a plan for a remote module approach to that. But I want to be clear that we're really supporting high school students in their need to take a plethora of courses throughout the year. We've gotten some questions about afternoon blocks and asked to clarify that a little bit more. So we're really working on how this time can be used effectively and efficiently. We've started working with some teachers on that. We're going to need to do more work on this with teachers. Students might be scheduled to stay and engage in one-on-one opportunities with teachers. Other students may be required to log in to a learning session from home. So we feel like these afternoon sessions could provide ways for students to learn in person if they need to stay for those services or for that learning, or remotely from home for students who are on their remote days in the afternoons. We also know that we're talking to Mary Beth Ebert, our special education coordinator at the high school, about special support services. We're also talking to Dave Robinson, thinking about guidance support that could maybe happen in those afternoons, again, both remotely or in person. So parents ask, could my student be required to go home, log on, and be in a one-on-one session with a teacher? Yes. Could they be asked to go home and log into a cohort conversation with their guidance counselor? Yes. All of those things. And we think that these blocks of times are going to help us develop structured learning time that we can really fit to what students' needs are, including one of the things that we're concerned about at the high school is addressing some of the existing gaps from the spring. So we know that for students who feel like there are gaps in their learning, teachers feel like there are some gaps from the spring, that time can be scheduled to sort of fill that in and do some remediation services. I know that Kara or Doug, I'm not sure, are going to talk more about consistency and support for remote learning. That was another point that came up on the slide that parents have been asking about. So we're looking to create that district-wide also in our building. So I know we're going to talk more about how do we set standards for what remote learning looks like, how do we work with teachers and support them through that, work with students, making sure that they're able to have the FaceTime contact with teachers when they need it additionally from what's scheduled in the schedule. And we're going to be thinking about that for the rest of the summer. Also, phase 1 of our planning, I think, is incredibly important for that to happen. The next piece that came up in all of the meetings were safety concerns. So, Mike, you just started asking about some safety concerns about bathrooms. You know, we have been in conversation with our team, figuring out what that will look like. We haven't shared that fully because we're not at the point where a model is approved yet. But in
Ronnie, are you okay?
Oh, Colleen, you're gonna be
okay.
I am like the lightning rod of just saying. So.
Yeah, Amy, I'm just glad there's no flashing red lights out of your window tonight. Anything's been broken from last time.
Yeah, I know. There have been some comments how I have handled myself differently this week, so it's not lost on everybody on the call. So safety concerns. You know, we're thinking about developing those safety concerns for all the in-person aspects of the model. So masks, right, being required for all students and adults. Sanitizing, working with Bob Shiroli to make sure that all of our classrooms, because our students will move, have sanitizing stations located near the door so that students can sanitize when they enter their room, students can sanitize when they exit the room. Thinking about classroom distance, we got a lot of questions about that. If we are in a hybrid model, the spacing and the splitting of the cohorts allows us for desks to be at or close to 6 feet in all places. That is our goal, and we will get there. thinking about working with teachers to assign seats so that there are less students sitting in those seats every day. Bathrooms, Mike, you asked about that, thinking about taking outer doors off the bathroom so that students aren't congregating inside the bathrooms, closing down every other sink, closing down every other urinal. And then also you talked about limiting the number of students in there. We know that is going to need support through staff or through administrators or somehow, and we're still working on the details of that. Someone just asked about that. One-way hallways, we have a map of what that will look like so that students can get through the building and we can get through the building and with one-way traffic. Shutting down lockers, not using lockers this year, going to what Adam said, entry into the building is going to look different this year. So students will not be able to come in and go in and sort of hang out in the hallways. They'll have to go to their first period classes. And then thinking about the traffic flow at entrance and exit. We are not recommending staggering start times because we have so many entrances and exits at the high school. We think we can handle it. But I think Adam brought up a really good point, is that we feel like the time with students when we're bringing small groups in, that's the last point, that time is going to be really important for students and teachers to meet and build relationships. We know we learn best from people that we know and we trust. So we think that's an important part of that small group return. But we also know that much of that time needs to be, some of that time needs to be spent on safety protocols. And routines so that students are going to understand that where they're in those in-person days, what does that look like? What does that look like when I arrive to school? What is my passing time going to look like? What are the rules around masks and breaks and bathrooms and all of that? So we're really hoping to drill down on a schedule for that if we get to the next step with the team and really able to think about what that time will do for us in terms of training. And then the next slide is just the schedule again. It's just looking at what that schedule will do and some of the questions I answered last week. I'm happy to talk more about the schedule or any of those points that came up in the slides.
Susie?
So I think I've got a question probably for Bob versus you, Amy, but either one of you are welcome to answer. Two concerns that, the school is old, right? So there's a lot of concern. The school is old. Ventilation system's old. There's rumors that windows have been painted shut and can't be opened. I don't know if that is true. And there's interior classrooms that actually don't have windows. And so one question I have is there truth to the story that windows don't open? And if that is true, are we remedying that prior to school starting? And second of all is, will we not be using interior classrooms because indeed they are windowless and that is not safe?
So I could jump in and answer these, Susie.
Yep.
So I'll start with the first one that you asked was windows. So we've done an assessment this week on every window in all the schools. All the custodians have done them in each school. And I can say we are getting screens on every single window. Right, so we have the availability to open them without the worry of any bugs or anything coming in. And at the high school, there are a few windows that don't open, but we are looking at bringing an independent contractor local to Wakefield. They were actually out today, and they're going to fix the windows for us in collaboration with the DPW to make sure that they open. So we did a count, and there was a few that didn't open, right, with a school from the 50s in addition in the 70s. I think that's kind of common if you were to look across the state.
Sure.
We have looked into that and we are working on it. And then with the HVAC at the high school, again, one of the reasons of the many reasons why we're looking to get a new high school for the district and are on the MSBA approved list and in the process. But we are in discussions and vetting an independent contractor. DESE sent out a suggested list that's on the Mass State approved bid list that we've vetted, and actually today we selected one, and this engineering firm will be able to start within the next week to do an independent assessment of and the health of the high school and all the schools in the district for that matter, and give us a report on what works well, what we can improve on, and just any safety measures that we can make going forward to make sure that everyone is safe as possible. And then I think lastly, you were talking about interior classrooms.
Yep.
So the plan right now is to possibly get air purifiers for the interior classrooms, but again, we're gonna wait to see what this independent contractor comes back and tells us and what the suggestions that they make.
Perfect, thank you so much.
Colleen?
Amy, I'm so sorry. I have no idea. You guys were all laughing, and I had no idea what you were laughing about. I was asking my son if he was okay, but I also care if you were okay. Somehow I didn't drive the game. I apologize. I just have a few questions. I'm not sure if I missed this part, and I'm sure that it's still being planned out, but if the cohorts are designated yet, and do you want to answer that one first?
They're not.
They are not, okay. And then on our in-person days, dismissal time seems static unless otherwise directed by the teachers or support staff. If students do not have a scheduled support meeting with either their teachers or the support staff, are they being directed to leave the building, or are they allowed to stay in the building?
That's a really good question. Let me finish the full answer for the cohorts. The cohorts are not determined yet. We are actually working with the scheduling company to figure out how we can do that with iPass the way so that we may not have to hand do the cohorting. But we are going to recommend, recommending that it's going to be done alphabetically, like we talked about last week, with maybe some shifts based on making sure that students get the services they need. So we're going to have to look at the overall population of the school splitting in half, and then looking at class sizes, what that will do to class sizes. And we may have to sort of shift to the left and right or middle to sort of make the split as even as we can. So that's work we have planned. Dave Robinson has already started work on that. So that's unfolding, but they haven't been created yet. And so in terms of dismissal, students who are staying behind to do work or to meet with teachers or to have a quiet learning space versus students who would be leaving. So we had a conversation with Danielle last week about what lunches would look like and what the grab and go would look like at high school. Very similar to what Adam talked about. So we would be dismissing. We need to think about the flow of the traffic in the building. And where it would be making sense to send students down to either be walking through the cafeteria. Again, we're talking about taping off spots, having the lineup work so that they can walk around the cafeteria in a distance way, go in through one of the open places to get their grab and go with the milk option that comes with it. So they need to go in because of the refrigerators, and then potentially come out to go to buses, or to come out and to potentially walk around the school to their cars or to the front of the school where their parents are. So students who would be staying behind, Colleen, will need a place to stay in the cafeteria. And so we are working out how many students we can fit in the cafeteria. That is limited. But we don't envision that the number of students staying behind at first will be as great as it will as the year continues, right? So we envision that we'll have a couple of weeks where most students will be leaving just to sort of get in that mode. And so if there's any learning happening with teachers, it'll mostly, not all, but mostly be happening remotely in the afternoon. So therefore we can get used to having a small group in the cafeteria. So the idea is that that group would stay. The other students would get their grab and goes, exit, and then once they have eaten and finished, we can dismiss them and monitor getting them back to the places where we're working. And that's not going to be like an open campus drop-in kind of thing. It is going to be scheduled. We will know where students are going. There will be admin and teacher support to get students where they need to go. And again, the hallways will still be one way even when there's less kids in the building, so we know the flow of traffic will move.
Okay.
Does that kind of answer your?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted you to define how that was going to happen with the support potentially in the afternoon. The third question was attendance, and having high schoolers myself, I feel that this question is particularly specific, or not specific to the high school, but even more it comes up in the high school more, where we have the 3 remote days. And on the synchronous days, I would imagine that attendance is taken just like it would be on in-person days.
Yep.
But on the asynchronous days, is attendance there going to be more participation and performance-based than actual attendance, because it can't be qualified the same way?
Right. And so I think the question is most likely, but it will depend on the subject, and it will depend on the course. And so I would say that the Wednesday synchronous learning, we are talking about that being obviously, as you said, a mandatory component, that attendance on those days would be mandatory. There's a clear schedule laid out. On the asynchronous days, that may look like you could track attendance in a different way. So for example, if I were to post a question online and expect every student to sort of log in for a certain period of time, or to engage in a virtual conversation at some point, or just to post a response to something, and I can gauge by the amount of writing how much time they took on that, that to me is a mark of attendance, right? And I envision, and again, this is going to need to have some drilling down with teachers and teacher input to what this will look like. I would envision that teachers would put a deadline on that. So if you are in cohort A, you have that piece to post. You will have to do that Thursday, Friday during your time where you're asynchronous, and by Friday that piece is sort of ended, right? So that is a way to take attendance when you're not really taking attendance. You're looking at the product. And judging the work that came out of that experience, that is a virtual experience, an asynchronous virtual experience.
And the accountability piece that Doug spoke to in the beginning, or as part of the remote learning, that piece is amped up, and the students and obviously our staff are accountable in that way.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's going to feel that's going to feel different, but I think a lot of people were asking for that. And so when we were under this sort of, I keep saying emergency education plan that everybody was doing in March, we didn't really think that was, having high schoolers myself, it wasn't a place for it. We needed to get kids through and do the best that we could to support kids. Now I think we know this, we know what kids are coming back to. Teachers know this, they're starting to think we're going to have time to plan and really think about moving back into our traditional grading policy for students when we return, even in a hybrid model.
Thank you, Amy.
No, thank you.
Any other questions for Amy? Okay.
Great. I can just jump in. I just wanted to also highlight the work that Amy's done with Mary Beth Ebert and Lynn O'Neill in our post-academy program as well. The group our post academy is serving our students 18 to 22 in a transition program within Wakefield. A lot of the work is focused on transition skills, independent living skills, vocational skills. So the group really felt that as much as possible, those students were better served in person as well. And so the group has come up with a schedule that's highlighted in our reopening document that has our students who are attending post going 4 days a week in person with 1 day dedicated to remote learning and asynchronous activities. So I just wanted to highlight that piece. Of course, that schedule is really driven by the students who are in the program and what their IEPs call for. So I would say that, it's obviously subject to change, but I think the post group has done a nice job of putting together a schedule for our kids in the program.
It also, if I could add, Kara, that it matches our high school schedule in terms of Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And it is like some of our other programs, similar to Shannon describing the Doyle. It is a completely adaptive program to meet the needs of the students. This year in post, we're going to have 8 students enrolled, and we think, we know with the size of the building that the students will be safe because we'll be able to keep them socially distant. They will also be on different schedules because there's a fair amount of job coaching that goes on where students are transitioning from the school day to the workspace. And so I need to thank Karen Leahy for her leadership. She's a teacher leader there in the building, and I think that she is going to be instrumental in helping us with this transition as well. So
Great.
just wanted to add
That's
that.
great. Thank you, Doug. And thank you, Amy. We appreciate you being here tonight to add some more information to the high school schedule.
Thank you.
we're going to go ahead and shift gears over to talk a little bit more about our remote learning model. I'll send it over to Doug.
Thank you, Kara. So we've talked a lot about remote instruction. Remote instruction is really, I said this earlier, it's kind of it's the spine of our hybrid model, right? And it's also critically important for us to be able to do remote instruction well and to build off of it, right? And so, we've learned quite a bit in the spring. This coming fall, we know that our hybrid model has got to have schedules that are predictable and routines that are predictable for students and families. There needs to be a consistent technology platform. We need to make sure that students have access that they need to participate in their learning with technology. There will be increased accountability for students this year. Amy McLeod brought this up. So, and the Department of Education is requiring that we take attendance in all of our remote interactions. And so that will count as well. And we want to really structure our remote plan thoughtfully to increase the number of interactions and the personnel that students are interacting with, especially at, for example, the elementary level. When a lot of this work in the spring fell to the classroom teachers that were also responsible for all of the academic content areas as well. It's just too large of a burden for one person to take on. So we want to create opportunities for students to be able to interact with as many personnel as necessary to help them be successful. And that includes special education. It obviously includes counseling. And these are important parts, right? And so counseling, whether you're formally receiving counseling as part of an education program, or just because you might need that for support in a given period of time. So that's critically important that we share that. So one of the things in regard to changes, or things that I feel like has taken a big leap, is parents that are choosing kind of the full remote plan. I know we were talking last week and there was some conversation or confusion about, remote academy, and what does it mean, right? So we don't want to confuse what our options are or what family options are. We also don't want to confuse with what our expectations are in our full remote program. One of the most exciting things that has come up this week with our conversations with our reopening teams and our administrators is that we talked about starting the year in phase 2 with everyone being in a remote plan. What that does is that allows us to start everyone at the same time together. So whether you choose a hybrid and you might be attending some in-person learning, or if you choose a full remote plan, we're starting everyone in the same place. We're also going to schedule students in groups together. So if, for example, you are a Galvin student and you're in grade 5, you would be grouped into a class of 15 students. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a portion of students that are choosing the all remote model, and we're going to group those students and schedule them in with the students that are in that 15-person group, right? And so it will give them, to start the school year, it will give them an academic and social peer group, which we think is terrific. And when students start in a hybrid and the other students are staying in a remote plan, it will just make the groups a little bit smaller when we schedule them into classes. So if, for example, four students in a group of 15 at Galvin in grade 6 were scheduled, and so if 4 students were all remote, what they would do is they would receive kind of instruction and supervision from a teacher that's supervising remote instruction, and students that were going to hybrid to do some in-person learning would go to the Galvin to do that. And when they're learning remote, they would also have opportunities to interact with students, again, to increase kind of social peers and academic peers, which we think is a critical part, and we don't want to lose out on the opportunity to increase those opportunities for students to interact. So that's kind of a big plus for us in regard to the development of this model, or a kind of an added bonus that I think we've been able to figure out this week. Michael?
I'm sorry, Doug, sorry, probably roll his eyes because I've said this to him about 100 times already. When you describe that 5 people, let's say you have a 20-person cohort, 5 of which are going to be going exclusively remote, the other 15 who are going to be live in classroom education. If I understand it correctly, you said there's going to be opportunities to integrate all 20 together in some way. Is that correct?
That's exactly what I said, Mike. So because, Mike, everyone's going to be scheduled together, and everyone's starting in phase 2 and all remote together.
Yep. Yeah, I
Right?
like it. You obviously know, I think, segregating, and I know Kara said it earlier, we hate to segregate populations of a class for any reason, there's stigma, et cetera. So I think that's a great start. I know there's technology and training issues to get it done so that everybody can experience the live classroom environment, whether they're in the classroom or remotely. I understand we got to crawl before we walk, but that's a good first step. Thank you.
Right. And so a big question that we've gotten in this past week on our Zoom calls with parents, the state has released information about remote learning opportunities through virtual schools and virtual programming. And so we've gotten several questions about, would Wakefield be purchasing slots in those programs? You can pay a one-time fee per student for students to participate in academic programming that's kind of prepackaged, right? So if you are a student that's, choosing the schools, the way they're designed is you literally just log on, and it's all scripted, and it all comes via screen. There's really very little adult interaction, but in kind of just our initial look at this, we haven't dug too deeply into this, but we believe that we will have a portion of our staff available that will be supervising students in the remote space. And so our first choice is to have our own staff supervise students in our remote model before we think about kind of purchasing seats in programs that we just don't know enough about right now at this point. So that's a really important piece. We've also gotten a lot of questions about curriculum. And so whether you are remote or whether you are participating in a hybrid plan, so your curriculum will be standards-based, based on the Massachusetts curriculum framework, right? And so the lessons that will be designed and offered will be aligned with the curriculum standards. The assessments that you take will be aligned with the curriculum standards. That's a really important piece. And so we're also working with the WEA in regard to negotiating what that remote model will look like. But they've been great partners, and they've actually had some really great ideas for us to help improve this, and also how to help support families as well. And so one of the things that we're talking about right now is the possibility of moving Wakefield Parent University to the fall to really develop supports for parents to kind of be to create relationships with them, because if their student or if their son or daughter is participating in a remote model, they'll be able to have relationships with teachers that are in that space that are also going to have relationships with teams of teachers in schools to best figure out how to support. So there's a lot of good that I think is being developed, and so really the next part of this is really figuring out exactly how many students will be choosing the all remote option, and also working thoughtfully and collaboratively with staff to figure out who might be the best candidates to kind of support remote instruction. So.
And I just wanted to back up what Doug said related to the curriculum and how important it will be for our students who choose the full remote option to be connected and participating in the scope and sequence of our curriculum across levels, because we've had teacher working groups work all summer with our curriculum coordinators in all subject areas to be thinking about what does the fall need to look like based on where we left in the spring, and what are the changes to our curriculum that we need to make, and how can we continue to make to create that vertical alignment as well as that horizontal alignment across the elementary level, and get things pretty tight in terms of what we're prioritizing during this time. Because I think that the work that was done in terms of our curriculum mapping before the closure is playing into this in a really important way, and I think we've had to prioritize even further. And so I think that we're going to need to have our families who choose full remote part of that as well, in the case that they transition back at some point, and just that we as Wakefield Public Schools know where those students left when they went out in the spring, and how they should start in the fall.
We've also gotten questions about homeschooling. Parents have reached out and they've asked, for our guidance or thoughts around homeschooling, and we respect any family's decision to homeschool their children. It really is kind of this organic, grassroots option that is really based on independence of families that really want to be in this space. But I will share with you that curriculum gets pretty sophisticated pretty early. And so one of the things that we've had conversation with parents where we've said, before you kind of think about homeschooling, maybe the remote only option might be a good place to start. And if that doesn't seem like a good fit, then maybe you could kind of transition by filling out a homeschool plan, which you can find on our website. And then you can transition your son or daughter to homeschooling if that's what you wish. But we're really trying to make connections with families to support the academic progress of the children in Wakefield. So that's it for this.
Any questions on the remote piece? I know that a couple have been asked before we move on.
Yep, Chris?
It's just, the only part that concerns me is that I really want students, no matter where they are on remote, to have a definite schedule, that they're going to be in this class from 9 to 10, the next class from 10 to 11, and how those transitions happen. Are they multiple Zoom links that they have to follow, so they're into one, then they close out and go open the next one? I mean, how's all that going to work?
Well, it depends, Chris, what program you are a part of. So if you're in the remote only space, we're asking teachers to work with administrators to create schedules and routines for students so that they can be in that space that you just described. Right? And if they're in a hybrid model, you heard Amy describe it's a 2-1-2 model. So Wednesday is a full synchronous, right? In the asynchronous, it would be more independent at the high school level. And at the middle school level, the students are exactly scheduled exactly like you just described, right? In elementary, the plan that we're proposing this evening is really to support families as much as we possibly can, to take the burden of remote instruction or independent work and teaching away from parents, and take that on ourselves to send them home with assignments that they can do independently. So I don't know if that makes sense, but so in regard to what it will look like, it will look different at each level, Chris. And it will also look different not only at each level, but also based on which plan you choose as a family.
That's fine. I just think that one of the bigger advantages to in-person learning is not only the contact, but it's the structure. And I think our students need a lot of structure, and if we aren't careful, we're going to leave them out there all loosey-goosey, and that's where they kind of lose.
So we agree completely, and I think we learned this in the spring, And, one of the drivers that I think is going to keep people engaged is the way that we're grouping and scheduling students. We're looking at scheduling students to start the year in these smaller groups to start, Chris, right? So that the cohorts are smaller. And if, for example, you look at the middle school model, the middle school plan, I would argue it's the most exceptional plan in the state. I don't think anyone has been able to build a model like that. So that gives students, if you're a grade 5 student, you know your schedule every day at the start, from the start of the year, right? And so they've really done brilliant work there. But different levels require different supports, and I think Amy's schedule is fantastic in that they haven't cut things out of the schedule. You heard her say tonight that there's electives, all courses are being offered. Not all districts are doing that. They're prioritizing classes, and they're front loading, right? And so I think the schedule that the high school built is really fair, equitable, and gives students access to all of the things that they might be interested in. And I've already shared my thoughts on the elementary schedule. I think it's outstanding.
Can I piggyback on Chris's comment?
Sure.
I think what is difficult about this plan, if you're a parent, similar to the elementary school parent who's trying to decide, am I going with option A or am I going remote because I don't know about workaround or wraparound services? I think for a parent who's trying to decide if they're going to go hybrid or remote, there isn't a tremendous amount of detail here. And I think to Chris's point, without being able to say, if I go fully remote and I've got an elementary aged kid, what can I expect? Are they going to get X number of the cores, whatever that looks like? That detail isn't here yet, right? And I know you guys are working around the clock trying to get there, but I think in the spirit of trying to give parents the information they need in order to make the decisions that you need to know in order for you to, right? That's a piece that continues to be a little bit light on detail, and that I think it would be helpful for parents to be able to see what would that sample schedule look like for a elementary aged kid, a middle school kid. High school kid's a little different, right? Because like you said, their schedule is kind of determined by the classes that they take. But I think for the other two, it might be really helpful to have just that framework.
Our model is going to be part of every meeting that we have until further notice.
Yep.
Right? And so I envision every school committee reporting about some part of our model, right? And as we develop student schedules, so it's, student schedules to see the framework here is one thing, but to actually see that more filled in with details, to see it more filled in with, not just the schedules, but what courses are being taken, what fits in, what are the challenges, what does it look like, what does it feel like, right? And so, we also have talked about having students join us to kind of contribute to the experience, contribute to the reporting of the experience as we get into this in the fall. And so you're right that we don't have it all flushed out yet, but I in regard to where we're starting and what we're proposing, I think it's an exciting opportunity.
Right, and the clarity you've provided of, we're not going with a third party, we're gonna have them be a part of the team. I just don't feel like we can wait.
I can add to that just in terms of visioning, because I think we definitely, this is kind of a nice model of rolling something out where you put it out, you get the feedback, and you say, oh, I didn't think, we get a sense of how things are received. And like Doug said, a big takeaway for us was just, it was a naming of the full remote option, but I think it threw a lot of people off. And so I think that we felt, it was really important to change that because it didn't match our vision. We didn't want it to be segregated. We did, of course, listen into what DESE had to offer in terms of their learning management system, but it's a vision of ours to staff it with Wakefield Public School staff and to assign all of our students to a classroom and a team. I can kind of speak to just some initial what we're thinking this will look like at elementary level in terms of expectations. Now, the elementary level the elementary schedule that was proposed tonight does not have a synchronous remote learning part of it. It's all more extension activities and asynchronous remote expectations for the students who will participate in the hybrid. For students at the elementary level who choose full remote, what we envision is them getting the same amount of live instruction. Now, that might not be from, we might not be able, I don't even think live streaming into an elementary classroom would work. But that live interactions need to happen. And so for all of our students in the hybrid, they are getting, at least 2.5 hours, 4 days a week of live interactions. And again, like Matt said, we're really going to narrow down around the reading, writing, and math subject areas for that live piece. And we're also going to continue the work of narrowing down and prioritizing standards that are better taught in person or live. So now, who does that teaching is really going to be dependent on the work that we do in the coming weeks of knowing where our staff stands. One of the things that we've talked about is, trying to work with our staff who are unable to return to give them a role within their certification that will contribute to our school community. Now, if a teacher can't come back, will they necessarily leave, be assigned to the same position they left? I don't think that we can say that. I think that we're going to have to, the goal that we've said is we want to keep everyone employed, we want to keep everyone working, we want to keep everyone contributing. So what we would imagine doing is assigning remote teachers to cohorts and to classroom teachers to co-teach as well. And I think the Galvin piece really, I agree, sets up beautifully for families that choose full remote. The high school, I think, too, but it always just gets more complicated at the high school because of all the course selection and that sort of thing. But in terms of the Galvin, we have kids 2 days a week in person, but 3 days out of the week they're synchronous remote. So, that's a real opportunity for families that choose full remote to get what they need on the 2 days when everyone else is in person, that's aligned with what everyone's being taught, and potentially merge into the synchronous remote teaching, if that helps. Does that help kind of give a sense of where we're thinking?
I think you guys are in a chicken and egg problem, right? Like, there are parents who can't make the decision because there's not enough detail there, and yet you need them to make the decision so that you can figure out how to staff.
Exactly.
And so I just think a little bit more detail here is going to help you get to more definitive answers from families.
Right.
But that was helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
But we also want to take the pressure off of parents. There's no wrong choice here, right? It's similar to the choice that I had kind of the analogy of homeschooling versus remote, right? And so if you start in one, if a student starts in remote and they think, this isn't working, social peers, it would be better for our son or daughter to participate in the hybrid because they're scheduled in. We can factor them in, right? It's an easy transition. In fact, it would work seamlessly, right? And so that's something that I think is critical that we hope can take the pressure off of parents because so much is changing every day. And this idea that I have to know now, I have to know what tomorrow brings, I have to know the schedule, some of that information we have, some of it we don't, right? And even when we think we're going to have it at the end of next week, we may not because things could change, right? And so that's a really critical part in terms of a context that I hope if parents are watching tonight that they understand that there's no wrong choice, right? There is flexibility to move back and forth, right? You had a question?
No. Okay to move on. So I guess I'll just put the offer out. The last couple of slides are repeat slides from our last presentation.
I think we've added a little bit to this.
Oh, great. Okay, go ahead,
I
Deb.
think we've learned a little bit more. Bob, are you still here?
I am.
Loud and clear there, Bob, in your basement. So, do you want to talk a little bit, Bob, about air purifiers and HEPA filters?
Yeah, so I touched base on that earlier when I think Susie asked the question about interior classrooms. Again, like I mentioned, we're having a independent assessment done. So we're going to look at purchasing air purifiers for all interior classrooms without windows.
All classrooms that we're going to be using.
Correct. So we're going to be looking at doing that, and we're working with our filter contractor as well as the DPW and the new HVAC tech and Joe Conway and Chris Pierce on looking at options to provide the best HEPA not HEPA, best MERV rated filters we can with the systems, HVAC system that we have currently in place. And again, the independent contractor is going to be able to help us there as well. So that's kind of where we are with that.
Thanks, Bob. Can you share a little bit for the committee information around cleaning protocols, what the schedules have looked like for the custodians at Woodville, and how that's gone? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to summer school. So for the past couple of weeks, summer school has been occurring there, and the custodians have been walking around throughout the day, touching high touch surfaces, making sure those are getting wiped out, and then once everyone exits the building, staff and students, they're doing a high clean on all the surfaces that anyone was at, whether it's a classroom or any high touch surfaces, making sure they wipe everything down, disinfect with the spray that we have. So they've been doing that every day. Again, hitting the playgrounds at the end of each day if they use the playground to ensure that everything gets wiped down. But again, to Ruth Clay's message, right? There's been no traceable contact of COVID through surfaces. Again, that's what Ruth Clay and I believe the CDC has also echoed that. But we are going to continue with our plan to do as much as we can to wipe down surfaces and clean as best as possible.
Right. And so, in regard to the spray, are you talking about the hydrostatic cleaners?
No, so just the disinfectant spray that we have in bottles and using rags to wipe down. With the model, when we come back, or for the hybrid or full in person, we'll be using 2 days to do a high deep cleaning, and that will be with the electrostatic sprayers.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Bob.
I just have one question for Bob, if that's okay.
Sure.
In regards to the high school, especially ventilation, because I know a number of those classes get really hot, just because I've had kids there myself. So especially maybe math hall and up on the third floor, are staff allowed to use fans, and how will they stay cool when it gets really hot in those rooms?
Again, we're going to look at the DESE and CDC guidelines and really get a plan around that and see what our HVAC assessment comes back with. With the fans, the DESE has suggested bringing interior air in, and fans can assist there. But we are going to do a little more research into that before making a final decision.
Okay, thank you.
Good to go?
I think so, yep.
And this is another repeat slide, so I don't know if
but
there are
we can talk a
questions.
little bit about
Sure.
this. So we've gotten some questions about contact tracing and who is responsible for that and how that would occur. So in the guidelines that we've gotten from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in mid-July, they're very clear about kind of the critical parts of understanding scenarios around contact. It's a very detailed document, but contact tracing in Wakefield will be headed up by our local Board of Health. And so I don't know if you want to share a little bit about contact tracing, Ruth?
Sure, I'm still here. Can't guarantee how much longer. So contact tracing. So contact tracing is something that the health department does all the time, even before COVID-19, because there's the long list of reportable communicable diseases in Massachusetts that have to be reported to the health department, and that we do contact tracing. Most people think of that in terms of foodborne illness. So they call, I got sick at such and such a place, and then we call the person back, and we do not necessarily contact tracing, but we do an investigation to try to figure out where it came from, who else did you eat with, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the concept behind contact tracing. So what happens with COVID-19 is that any positive case of a Wakefield resident gets reported to the Wakefield Health Department. And actually, since we're joined with Melrose, we get Wakefield and Melrose. That's important because we're talking about not just students, but we're talking about staff and teachers also that don't necessarily live in Wakefield, right? So somebody tests positive, the lab reports that to the state, and it's entered into what's called MAVEN. Don't ask me what it stands for. And it's basically a statewide electronic surveillance system. The data goes in there. Karen Cronin, our public health nurse, watches it multiple times a day. It's the first thing she does in the morning, and I think it's the last thing she does at night, considering the reports I get. So that's watched all the time. When a case appears, that person receives a phone call from either Karen or one of the school nurses. The school nurses have really been key in helping us with contact tracing because it's certainly not something we can do with just a part-time 14-hour-a-week public health nurse. So the school nurses have been helping during the last school year, and a couple have been doing it over the summer, as well as actually one of our Board of Health members who's an ex-public health nurse. So the person is called, and that's called case management. There's a long questionnaire that we fill out over the phone with them with things like a whole range of symptoms, when did the symptoms start, and then we go back 48 hours from when the symptoms started or from when they were tested if they're asymptomatic. And we try to identify close contacts. Now we're talking contact tracing. So a close contact is defined as anybody who that person spent more than 15 minutes within 6 feet. So we're talking about carpooling, some sports activities. However, I will say that the Wakefield Sports have done a great job at doing sports this summer with social distancing and masks, so that hasn't been an issue. But the point is, they tell us who they've been in touch with as a close contact, and then we start the contact tracing part. So the person who is sick or is positive is put in what's called isolation for 10 days. And then there's criteria for them to be done with isolation, that they do not need to be retested. As a matter of fact, we encourage them not to be retested.
Great.
For the people who are in quarantine, that's 14 days, preferably without leaving your house. And it doesn't matter if they get tested at that point. If they're negative, it doesn't change their quarantine. If they're positive, it actually lessens that they switch to isolation, and it's only 10 days.
Got it.
So that's case management and contact tracing, and that is what our department does.
Thank you so much.
Okay, done.
I appreciate that. And so the other bullet that we've edited, we've made some edits to this slide. And so I just want to reiterate, I feel like we can't say this enough. We will continue to collaborate with the state and local boards of health and DPH ahead of any changes in programming that we make. For example, changing from phase to phase, right? From phase 2 to phase 3. And we've gotten a number of questions about masks. Are masks required? And the answer to that question is yes. Masks will be required for students in pre-K through post. And we are also working on a district policy to further get language around this and to support in this effort. And so if summer programming that's being offered at Woodville currently is any indication of how successful we have the potential to be, the kids at the Woodville have been amazing, right? Estelle Burdick also has students in her after-school program currently, and they've been exceptional there as well. So, we have an additional kind of planning considerations.
Doug, I hate to do it.
Go ahead, what do you got?
I've got some questions on.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I
health
didn't mean to move
protocol.
ahead.
Sorry.
I was trying to judge everyone's attention.
So,
Did Ruth get off too soon?
So yeah, I've got some questions related to this. So
Okay.
Just really quick. So I think that there are some concerns about if a student gets sick, am I going to be alerted to if they're in my kid's class? Am I going to be alerted? Well, you're only going to get, from what I'm hearing from Ruth, you're only going to get alerted if your child was within kind of those parameters that Ruth just described. You're never going to be sent a letter that said this kid is sick. Like, that's just not going to happen. That's a privacy thing, not going to happen. If one kid gets sick, are we shutting everything down? No, that does not sound like that's what we're saying. We're saying that there will be contact tracing that happens. Another question that I've gotten is about monitoring. Yeah. And so based on what Ruth just said about people being put, so I'm talking students. So if a student is identified as someone who needs to be put in isolation or as who is quarantined, are the school nurses responsible for monitoring the fact that that child does not come back until their 10 days or 14 days are up? Is that part of kind of the responsibility of the school nurse, or is that the responsibility of the parent and child?
So in regard to the expectations around students being in school and out of school as it relates to COVID, that will fall to the administration, and they will work in collaboration with the school nurses.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you guys will be, because it's not just about testing, right?
We have to, right? And
Okay.
if I can jump back to your question about, or your comment about, if a child is ill, will we know? Right, and which is a really important question. It's a common question that we're starting to get.
Right.
And so, and it's interesting because with adults, we all understand kind of the right to privacy. But with children, it seems like we think that goes away, right? Because he's a child and they're in my son or daughter's class and we're friends and we should know, and I understand that, and I understand the kind of the anxiety around that. Right, but we're going to be, and our nursing staff, we're going to do training with our nurses, right? And that's going to be executed by Mary Doherty and Kelly Qualey. We're going to be conservative, right? We're going to be pretty conservative, and we're going to make really the best decisions we can to keep people really as safe as we can. If, for example, I think, summer school has been a pretty good dry run for us in learning how to open, right? We're bringing on an additional nurse, okay, to support our nurses, right? And so if that additional nurse is, helping and supporting in the district, they can be assigned where needed, right? So they could be doing contact tracing, they could be filling in a school, they could be helping in any way that we need them to help. So we've talked about this, and we've also looked at the budget, and we've said, okay, for example, in summer programming, we've hired a summer nurse, but we also have a contracted services nurse. So we have 2 nurses over there, right? And so we wanted to really make sure that students had the oversight, and we supported families the way we needed to open school. Those types of decisions aren't going to stop just because summer's ending, right? And so I know I'm getting a little grainy with my answer, but what you described is spot on, because it's not a knee-jerk reaction, like one kid's sick, oh my gosh. But if there is an issue of safety, we will act accordingly, right? Yeah.
Right. I didn't get to say the other half of that was, if you see a cluster of students across cohorts, of course we're going to shut it down.
Shut it down,
right.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways.
There's no question.
My last question, testing. So I've had some people ask me about mandatory testing, which I don't know that any school is doing that. But would we ever consider optional testing where we set up a situation kind of like what Melrose did, but Melrose did it because they needed to do it. They had high school kids that tested positive, or at
Yeah.
least one. Would we ever consider sponsoring kind of a local testing where students and teachers could get tested, just so that we could feel like we got a good sense of what's going on, considering that kids are often asymptomatic?
So we've gotten some questions about this in regard to making testing mandatory.
Right.
Right. And, you know, I heard just recently that, you know, some private universities are making testing mandatory. Public universities are not, right? We're a public system. And so I think for us to make it mandatory, this is something that I have discussed with Ruth Clay. And we'll also have a question out with our legal counsel to try to understand what we can require. Because if we can require, and that will give us an indication, as well as other people an indication that we've all been tested, it's a common expectation, we will pursue that. So we don't have an answer to that yet, so that's coming.
Yep.
In regard to the optional piece, the town did this before they all went back to work.
Yeah.
And so we would pursue that same idea, but in that case, testing was optional.
But that
Right.
would be staff only. I'm thinking staff and students.
So, but if we offered it to staff, there's no reason why we couldn't offer it to students, right?
I don't think Ruth liked that idea. Which is okay.
Well, it's not a like or dislike. Testing is complicated. There's 3 different kinds of testing. Each of them have pros and cons. The ones that are really accurate, most accurate, take the longest turnaround. The antigen testing that you hear about now that you get back in 15 minutes is not particularly accurate. And the protocol is if you test positive with that, you need to go and get a PCR test. There's also cost, and availability of even, so the test kit availability is difficult, especially for the PCR, maybe not as much for the antigen. So the whole testing piece, and really all that tells you is the status of the person that day.
Right.
You know, if the next day they go to a party, all bets are off.
Yep. I totally appreciate that point of view. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ruth. Any other questions before we're pretty close to summarizing, just in terms of talking about our next steps for our planning phases, so.
Thanks.
I think this is again another repeat slide from last week, but just highlight some of the things that we're going to continue to do.
Yeah, this is information that we're continuing to gather and kind of consultation that we're continuing to make and develop in regard to relationships in our work. So in regard to closing remarks and next steps, I want to stress, and I'm, again, pleased to end with this slide, right? And I can't emphasize this enough, right? We are committed to providing learning opportunities. That's our jobs, right? We are committed to this. This is our life's work. To do this with integrity, structure for all students, all of our students, right? We believe that this is the foundation. The foundation of this commitment is based on relationships, trust, and communication, right? Between faculty, staff, administration, as well as our students and families. And for the past week or so, we really can't thank the community enough for pushing us to answer questions and for your ongoing support. And we want to thank faculty and staff as well for all of their support as well. So I don't know if anyone has any questions before we make our final recommendation.
Yep, Mike?
One quick one, Doug, just to make sure I have it clear. So we have, I'll use the elementary school, although it it applies everywhere. So you have a regular elementary school teacher who's going to teach a class in person, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. You're also going to have a segment of that cohort that is remote only. so let's say it's first grade. Is the idea behind it that those two instructors, the one that's teaching live in person and those that are doing the remote, will kind of team teach together? So that's part one of the question. The second question is, how are you intending to staff for the remote instructor? Obviously, the others you could argue have. Is it going to be teachers who don't feel comfortable teaching live and we can deploy them into that role? Or is there a potential we would need to hire additional teachers if we didn't have that resource? How would that play out?
Do you want me to go ahead? No, go ahead. I can just speak to a couple, and then I was just talking about this today. So I think that the team teaching concept at the elementary level is something that we could get our head wrapped around. So like we said, we are going to give everyone a class and an assignment. Now, if a portion of that class chooses to be full remote, then class numbers might be less, but there would be an expectation for collaboration with a remote teacher. And one of the things we're prioritizing across all levels is the collaboration piece in terms of planning lessons. So we would see the remote teacher being part of weekly planning of lessons, because again, we're trying to be pretty consistent across the elementary level, across grade levels, and particularly reading, writing, and math, just so that when we, if we do have to pivot to remote, it's an easy transition. So yes, I think that you're on the mark in terms of what we're envisioning, and in terms of who that remote teacher is. I think we have to, again, figure out, get final numbers from our staff in terms of who cannot return, and then look carefully at their areas of certification and see, place them best with a cohort of students in a particular grade level that would match their certification. And I think, I could also speak to the numbers are really going to drive the staffing in terms of how many students we have who choose a full remote option, how many staff who cannot return and that can take on a remote teaching position, and then we'll see if we need to add remote staff from there. But I think we're going to first start to see who we can reallocate, who can't come back, if that answers.
Yeah,
It does.
And I think I would add as well, and if we need to add staff, we would try to do that.
Yep, great, thank you.
Thank you. So just to close, our final, I know we've said this a few times, but what we are recommending on behalf of our reopening teams and our administration is for the Wakefield Public Schools to start in a phased-in hybrid model. We feel like it really gives families and us a really great way to start the school year and to do as much in-person work as we can do in a very slow, progressive way. So.
Okay, great. So with that, I would say we have a motion.
We do. Move that the school committee approve the reopening plan recommended by the superintendent, which contains a hybrid plan that includes in-person and remote learning in a phased-in approach, with the understanding that the superintendent will be authorized to make operational decisions about the implementation of these models and to make the decision to transition between models as needed throughout the school year, consistent with the plan and with notice to the school committee as soon as practical.
Second.
Thank you. The motion has been made and seconded. Do we have any discussion? Tom?
Thank you. Yes, I have a few remarks I'd like to make at this time, but certainly with starting, as we all obviously know, we're living in times like no other. And this past summer, from July through now, the superintendent, the administration, teachers, administrators, custodians, and really everyone that makes this school district tick has been working like they have never in a July month before. And these extraordinary times, I'm certainly very grateful to have the type of staff and administration that we do. We wouldn't be having this public discussion starting certainly a couple weeks ago, but really in earnest last week, without such a quality team of people, regardless of agreements and disagreements, we worked together and we landed in a good place. So I wanted to say that, just up front, thanking the superintendent and the team for really working incredibly hard and being very open to responsiveness and being open to concerns and frankly criticisms that have been forthcoming. I'd like to share my focus in supporting any plan, whether it was last week or through tonight in the course of the last week. That is first and foremost our ability to go back to school in any plan in a safe and healthy environment that is met through metrics and safety standards. Our capacity to provide a quality teaching and learning environment for students. Our capacity to reach and obtain and support the social emotional learning needs of all students. And honestly, the convenience and the inconvenience for parents. I'd also like to thank, if I may, parents, staff, and community members for participating in the forums the administration conducted, for writing very thoughtful and sometimes emotional emails and letters, for sharing ideas and concerns, and yes, criticisms. In many ways, I also want to appreciate the candor in which members of the community were very direct in sharing their thoughts and their willingness, and often in sharing personal experiences, some of which we heard earlier tonight as Amy read some of the letters. I also want to say that while these proposals by the superintendent and team are well designed, thoughtful and flexible and comprehensive in focusing on students, to which I greatly appreciate, there are many elements, especially those regarding working conditions for teachers, staff, and students, that need to be considered also. There are many elements specific to teaching and staff, to teachers and staff work days that are subject to negotiations with the union leadership. We have begun such negotiations, and it's important to say that to not only the committee, which knows that, but to the community. We've begun such negotiations with WEA units A, B, and C in an effort to define, to modify, and to agree, where appropriate, to the terms that veer away from existing collective bargaining agreements. Those existing collective bargaining agreements do not go away. They have not been extinguished, they have not been waived nor relieved, nor frankly should they be. In extraordinary times, we should make sure that we take extraordinary steps as an employer in this way to make sure that our staff, regardless of what one does, can come to work in a safe and healthy environment. We must follow the terms of the employee contracts and negotiate, elements, ultimately to ensure the success of the reopening of schools, again with a focus on safety, health metrics, and productive learning for kids. In my opinion, which is, I think, following up on the conclusion the superintendent, the assistant superintendent drew in their outstanding presentation tonight, but in my opinion, tonight's vote by the school committee is to set a district priority in reopening schools as soon as public health data supports our capacity to do so. To do so in a safe environment following state health and education directives and guidance. Secondly, if in support of the superintendent's recommendations, which I do, and in summary, in my view, we are driving the Wakefield Public Schools to a couple of important points. In no particular order, I feel very strongly that we are working toward a rigorous set of curriculum and deliveries. We are raising the bar in a very difficult time to make sure that we can do the best we can for our staff and to do the best we can, first and foremost, of course, for our students. I think we're also seeking to improve the remote learning experience from the spring. I think we're all pretty proud of the Learn Anywhere model, but what we certainly learned is our ability to take it from what was intended to support a few days to supporting several months just left a lot to be improved. And that's not a criticism on anyone's part. Everyone was doing everything they possibly could to make last spring work. I also think we're supporting tonight 170 days of school. I think we're supporting tonight that those 10 days in advance are for professional development and extraordinary training for teachers and staff to make sure that the types of goals expressed by the opening teams and the superintendent tonight can be achieved in partnership with our teachers and our staff. The phased approach that the superintendent spoke to about reopening, beginning with remote and moving when appropriate to the hybrid model. I think it's important to note from the earlier slides, a hybrid model would not begin earlier than September 29th. I think also tonight's vote, if positive, empowers the superintendent negotiations team to develop a memorandum of understanding for teaching expectations, supervision, evaluation, grading, attendance, safety protocols, and many other working conditions that veer from the existing collective bargaining agreements. And finally, an affirmative vote tonight, in my view, empowers this committee, the superintendent negotiations team, to bring back to the community and to the school committee the memorandum of understanding for ultimate support and approval. I just wanted to say that as a bit of a summary in wearing the hat that I have as chair of labor relations, but also sharing on a personal note a great deal of thanks to everyone, from the superintendent, the entire administrative team, to teachers, to the union leadership, to the custodial staff, to really every person. I say that, I guess, as a school committee member, perhaps more importantly as a parent. Just a big thank you. This is a very difficult time we're in. One of the most important elements of, I think, the presentation tonight and what the work that lies ahead is our capacity to live in a trusting environment, that we're all on the same page to seek the right things, and that we will be flexible enough to make sure that those things, to do everything we can to make sure that those things around safety for staff and students is paramount. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Any other comments? Mike?
Yeah, I want to echo that with Tom. I appreciate very thoughtful words there. Look, at the end of the day, there's no perfect choice here. Whatever we decide is imperfect. I would venture to guess that administration says whatever we start on September 17th will likely not be what we'll see on October 17th. It's going to evolve. We're all going to learn. It's uncharted territory. The whole environment is a moving target as well. But we also need to start somewhere. And I think the plan provides flexibility for parents and teachers, that if they decide they're not comfortable, they have a different risk tolerance than another parent, that they don't want to subject their child to that. Doesn't make them a good parent, bad parent. Everybody's trying to do the best they can. Others want their kids in school. And the same thing with teachers. You know, some teachers are going to have some reservations about going into school. Others are willing to do it. And our ability to be flexible to provide them with opportunities to perhaps teach a remote environment versus an in-class environment, that's the important thing. We all know the world is changing. You know, every corporate entity out there is changing their business model to work from home. So that's changing. How we shop is changing. And ultimately, I believe how we educate is going to change to this. It's probably the one silver lining to what has been a tragic situation with the COVID virus. But I think at the end of the day, the whole educational model is hopefully going to change for the better. I believe if we'll utilize technology and this remote option, there's a lot of opportunities for that as well. So it's a starting point. It's far from the end point for us. But I think providing that flexibility, we'll get there together. And I think we have to collectively continue to work together, be that parents, kids, administrators, teachers, to continue to monitor this and continue to evolve as the environment requires it. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else? Comments? No? I just have a quick comment. I just would like to start off by thanking all the stakeholders here involved. Clearly this has been a very trying time for everyone, students, parents, teachers, staff, administration, and I feel like, Wakefield is full of such great teachers, and I think that's what makes Wakefield such a special community. And I think it's no secret that a teacher's role is so different now than when it was in the past. We rely on our teachers to, not only teach our children, but sometimes they have to be, a counselor or some sort of a support system for them. And I think that those types of teaching services that teachers provide to our kids are immeasurable at this point. And I just feel like, with respect to the teachers, I do feel like if the public health data in Wakefield supports a safe return, then I do support the hybrid program model. Anyone else have any questions or comments? So the motion has been made and seconded. No further discussion, so I guess it is time for the roll call vote.
Ms. Purcell?
Yes.
Ms. Vayer?
Yes.
Mr. Markham?
Yes.
Mr. Callahan?
Yes.
Ms. Guida?
Yes.
And Mr. Boudreau?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The vote passes unanimously, 6-0. Moving on with the agenda, we have some subcommittee reports. Finance and Facilities, Chris?
Nothing earth shattering. We continue to meet every Thursday morning at 8, so we're back. I'll be back at this first thing tomorrow morning. And the projects that were going on for the summer are both on schedule, and we're not anticipating any problems.
Thank you, Chris. Labor, Tom?
Thank you. So the negotiating team and labor relations subcommittee have met effectively a total of 3 times this week, although not all together. Monday evening, Tuesday morning, and then Tuesday evening as well, to begin some of the conversations exactly around the working conditions that we spoke of tonight, and our ability to fill in some of the blanks, if you will, or some of the open-ended questions with regard to particulars around working conditions for units A, B, and C in particular. I think we're off to a good start. We have many things that we're at a common place on, and we have many good points of agreement, or at least consent anyways. And we will be reporting, labor relations will be meeting with WEA each Monday and Tuesday if needed for the month of September. And we will, with the goal of having a memorandum of understanding around this school year's by the end of the month for the October meeting.
Thank you, Tom. Student Services, we have not met, but we are scheduled to have a meeting on Monday, August 17th, so I will give you an update at our next meeting on the 25th. Policy, Susie?
So we've met twice since we last reported out for subcommittee meetings. We met on the 28th and just yesterday. And so we have, at a high level, talked about policies that may need to change in support of COVID. We will be laying 3 policies on the table at the next meeting on the 25th. One about masks, which Doug mentioned, one about staff travel, and one about privacy. So those are 3 policies that we plan to put on the table for consideration on the 25th. And then on the communication front, as Doug briefly mentioned, we're starting to talk about how we might leverage Parent University and move it from the spring to the fall. And could that be a way to kind of address some discussions and training and conversations that we want to facilitate with parents. We also spent some time yesterday talking about the need to streamline the way that communications are coming out from administration and just try to make that slightly less confusing. as well as thinking about getting a web page set up for kind of the reopening of schools and being able to have a place to start posting information, all the information that comes via email, getting posted kind of centrally so that parents aren't having to go back through their emails to kind of find things, but it would be in a location, and then potentially even using Facebook to alert people to the fact that those pages have been updated. So we've spent some decent amount of time talking about policy as well as communication, and we are planning another meeting tentatively for next Thursday at 5:30.
Great, thank you. Future dates and agenda items, again, our next school committee meeting will be held on Tuesday, August 25th at 7:30. School committee comments. Tom Markham?
So I'm all set to this evening. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Mike? Colleen?
Just want to quickly thank everyone for joining us again tonight. My committee members and administration have clearly thanked everyone in their emails and concerns before tonight, but I appreciate everyone tuning in tonight. And we have a lot of work to do going forward, and we're doing this together. So thanks for joining us. Good night.
Thank you, Colleen. Chris?
Good night.
Susie?
So I was gonna say goodnight, but I just got a couple of text messages that parents are confused about what we approved for elementary. So I think it is important for us to be very clear that the recommendation that was just put through for elementary is the hybrid A model.
Right. With the day, the remote day
With
being
Wednesday
Wednesday.
being, right, the remote day being Wednesday.
Right.
And that's all I will say. I'm done.
Thank you. And I'm all set too. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Gets me every time. Move that the school committee adjourn its meeting of August 12th, 2020.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion? Roll call vote?
Ms. Purcell?
Yes.
Ms. Bear?
Yes.
Mr. Markham?
Yes.
Mr. Callahan?
Yes.
Ms. Guida?
Yes.
Mr. Boudreau?
Yes.
Thank you so much. That concludes our school committee meeting tonight. I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of your evening. Be well. You only have an hour.